Anyone having business before the Queen's Justice of the Superior Court of Justice, attend now and you shall be heard. Long live the Queen. Please be seated.
Good morning, all.
Good morning. Good morning, Your Honor. Your Honor, I wonder if it might be appropriate at this moment if we just have perhaps a few words about timing for today so that my friends, that we can come to some agreement as to how long we would be going. Again, there are travel plans that have been made, there are schedules that we want to keep, and I know that on Fridays particularly, there are often issues of meeting those travel plans. So I was cognizant of that, so that we might be able to plan appropriately with Mr. Corbiere, who is in chief.
Okay. I think I made yesterday when I was talking about plans, I made some comments about being out of this room by 2:30, but that was wrong because our closing is much as in this space. Is that right?
Yes.
So, is there anything new from yesterday with the plan that people would like to be on the road by 3, and so we'll wrap up evidence by 2:30? Is that that's where we left it yesterday? Is there anything new that we need to know?
I mean, if folks that are traveling are fine with that, I can tell you that I've traveled to try to make that flight before, and it wasn't on a Friday, and traffic, and there's also construction and those sorts of things.
You're warning them?
There may well be unavoidable delays which will disrupt those, the important things.
I'm looking to you folks. I don't know what that flight is.
So Mr. Worm has very kindly suggested that we might want to aim for finishing by 2 so that we
Okay.
can catch the flight.
All right. It is true that it's unpredictable on that highway. That particular construction project makes things unpredictable.
We take advice, good advice when it is given. So we're happy to.
Well, let's do that then. Wrap up the evidence by 2. And have you thought then how you'd like to split the day? Should we look for one break around 11:30?
We would prefer one break.
Okay. As long as that works with the reporter, does that sound good?
92 is a little difficult with one break.
92 is difficult.
So I would just
There you
need
go.
maybe another 10-minute break just to give
Right.
them to rest.
Okay. So why don't we have a break about, try and have a short break about 11 and a short break. People need sustenance. Hypoglycemic players tend to get crabby. All right, I'll leave that with you, Mr. Moore. It's your examination where the best parts of the break are. We need at least one short break and one break long enough to get some food. And we've got till 2 o'clock. If you want to post early so people know where we are, that would be great.
All right, thank you very much, Alan. You can do that.
Okay.
Are they working?
Is it fine?
I don't think so.
Perhaps while we're waiting for that, I can invite Mr. Corbiere back to please stand.
Yes, please.
Testing.
Test.
Mr. Ebert is just going to retrieve an item for Mr. Corbiere.
Thank you.
He'll be back shortly. See, our sound system is out. Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Corbiere.
Good morning.
You'll recall yesterday that you affirmed on the stand that you would tell the truth to these proceedings. You understand you're still under that obligation and affirmation?
I understand.
Thank you. When you left office today, you had told us something about the origin story of the Anishinaabe people of this region. Do you recall that?
Yes.
The word you used was Adzokan, A-D-Z-O-K-A-N. Is that the proper spelling?
It's A-A-D-Z-O-O-K-A-A-N. That's a Ojibwe dialect. On this island we say Ansokan, A-A-N-S-O-O-K-A-A-N. Just a different dialect.
And roughly translated, that means sacred stories. Would I be correct in that?
Yes, sacred story.
And the sacred story, the one that you related, was about the creation of this area.
It was about the land and then the placing of the people on this land. That when they were placed here, the belief is that they're made for this place. And that they become then the caretakers of this land, of this territory, this area.
And since that time, has the Anishinaabe been caretakers and on this area of this land?
Yes, they have. One time, one old man from Wikwanko had told me that what he was told by his grandparents was that on Mantu Nala here, he said, everything that the Anishinaabe needs is here. All the medicines that we have, that we need for any of our diseases, is here. Any food that we need for our sustenance and our nutrition is here. So he said that right here on Manitoulin, we've been given everything that we need as Anishinaabe people. So he says we actually don't need to go anywhere else. We don't need to go off the island, but now of course we do. But the other thing, there's another story. This one actually is a story that was written at the Ojibwe Culture Foundation, but it was told by Mary Lou Fox. And she said that she was told that the elders had said after the Creator made here, the last place he made was Midominis, was this island. And that he purposely made it the best place for it to repose, was the word they used, to be his abode here on Manitoulin Island. So that's what Mary Fox had recorded from her elders at the time that she was working at the Ojibwe Culture Foundation. But one old man had told me that on Manitoulin he was told by his elders that everything we need as Anishinaabe is on Midominis. And like I said yesterday, some people call it Odawa-minis. Ojibwe call it Midominis, Odawa people call it Odawa-minis. And the Odawa, specifically Chief Ukeda of the Bear Clan, had stated in the council that Manitoulin was where the creator had placed the Odawa. And then similarly, Chief Asignon of the PP Gwen, or it's called the Sparrowhawk, American Kestrel clan, also said that the Anishinaabe the Ojibwe were created on Manitoulin and based on Manitoulin.
And in your description of the story of Nanabush chasing the beaver and the creation of the islands along the North Shore, were there people there as well?
Yeah, that's what we understand. At the time of Nanabush, the people were around, and that's who we played. Of course, that's who we played tricks on. We played tricks on the Anishinaabe, but also on the animals, as well as the trees. So that the birch bark has markings, because Nanabush had whipped them one time, because the birch tree was making fun of Nanabush when Nanabush was blinded in one of his episodes. So as a result, as punishment, Nanabush took a balsam bough, and we call that jinko in our language, and he whipped that tree. So that's why birch bark has all these serrations on it. So Nanabush always was going around anyway to try and get a free meal, basically. To eat and take things as easy as possible. So, and that was through his fellow Anishinaabe. So the people were around him.
And people's occupation of the territories that you described, has that ever been threatened at any time, at any point?
The major threat was when who we call the Nottowek, and that's popularly known as Iroquois people, but they call themselves Haudenosaunee people. They were the ones that in the mid-17th century had come up to take over this territory. And when they had come up to take over this territory, they had fought with the Huron, who then later became known as the Wendat. And then that's called Huronia, where they were situated. And Huronia is now where they call Midland and Penetanguishene. That's where these Wendat people were. And it's a kind of a famous episode in Canadian history that in 1649, the popular narrative is the Iroquois destroyed the Hurons, but of course they weren't destroyed. Some of those Huron Wendat actually were adopted into the Haudenosaunee people, the Longos. So they took them as captives. And then another set of them migrated east, and they went to Lorette, which is they now call the Wendat of Lorette, and they call their territory over there Wendake. And if you go north of Quebec City, they're there still. And then some of them actually went with us, Anishinaabe people, and they moved to Michilimackinac, and then they even went further west to Chiquanapan, which is on the southern shore of Lake Superior, and then they were even pursued out that way by the Nottowek, the Haudenosaunee people. And so the Anishinaabe and Wendat then were pushed, some say, right to the Mississippi. And then after that, we moved back, and then these Wendat people ended up having a reserve, well, I shouldn't say reserve, it was called reserves then, around Detroit. And then in subsequent years it was called Anderton, like they had a Anderton Reserve around that area later on in the mid-19th century. So these guys, they got dispersed, the Wendat, but so did the Anishinaabe people. And it was who we call the Nottowek. And in our language, we say that means a snake. And in William Jones' collection of Ojibwe texts, he specifically says that it means an adder, a type of snake. And then also William Warren says it means a snake as well, but he says that it was a copper-headed one. And then, but what linguists say, and this was by a distinguished linguist named Ives Goddard.
I'm sorry?
Ives Goddard, he's a linguist at the Smithsonian, and he says that the word Nodaway actually means speaks a strange tongue. But in our language now, what we say now for that word is Megwen. Megwen means speaks a strange language, different language, and that's our word for a foreigner, Megwen. But back then, Nodaway is the main component of that is the way at the end of the word. That indicates speaking or enunciating. So in our nowadays when we say, you might hear people say, "Gidinway na," and then that "Gidinway na" in the way is your manner of speaking. So "in" in front, it means way, and then "way" at the end is the way you speak. And when you say "Gidin" at the beginning, it would indicate you, "Gidinway," your language, your way of talking. And then "Gidinway win" made into a noun, your language. And then "Gidinway win" the noun. Now I've included you and me, so that means our language together. So if I'm talking to David, I would say that "Gidinway win" the noun, our language. So that's the word way, the morpheme way, but you can't just say way. It doesn't mean anything on its own. So similarly, if somebody is talking bad, we say "Jik-i-jue," I mean they're swearing. The "Jik-i-jue." Jik means bad or evil, and then "gi-jue" is speaking. And then if, like what I say of myself here, I said of myself yesterday, "Gokten pa-jik-i-jue," I'll flub my lines in Ojibwe, because the speakers here that speak are better speakers than I am. So when you say that in Apache, sometimes it means you hear a common phrase in English is about syntaxing, that you put the cart before the horse, or those kind of things. So my syntax is influenced more by English, and then speakers will note that. But when you say that "gi-jue," again, that "way" is in there, part of the word. So that's what this linguist, Ives Goddard, says of Nodaway, that meant Nodaway speaks a strange language, and so they end up saying that it's enemy's language. But for Ojibwe people, Anishinaabe people, Nodaway always meant a snake. And both William Warren and William Jones said it meant an adder, and others say it's snakes. And then there's a whole corpus of stories about them being snakes. And well, that's how you talk about your enemies. But so they're not very nice stories, and they're now in this day and age we're no longer enemies. But these stories have arisen through this historic animosity between each other. And we had here yesterday, Magic Anishinaabe, Iwabi Dige, Natao, Sokeo, Anishinaabe, Doganing Jabal, Anishinaabe, Stephen George. We had here yesterday a fellow named Stephen George, and he has a great story that he tells that was told by his mother. And it's about the founding of Wikwankong. And the story, they call the story Nesenwa. That fellow is the protagonist in that story. But the long and short of that story is that the Odawa and the Nodaway are hunting together. They're hunting together, they're living together, and and they come to Manitoulin. As they're coming to Manitoulin, they're having a hard time, these two families, the Nottoway and the Odawa. And other Odawa people go and tell this one, don't hang around with that fellow. He's bad news. Don't hang around him. And the Odawa says, no, he's all right. He's a good man. Anyway, as summer turns to fall and fall turns to winter, the people really start having a hard time. Their food is scarce. They're not able to kill any deer or moose or beaver. They're having a hard time. They're starting to starve. So as they get to these dire straits, they go off hunting. So the Odawa says, I'm going to go off and hunt. And so he goes off and he's gone for a whole day. And the Nottoway is in the camp with the families. And so he says that he's going to stay. And he starts looking and he sees that Odawa's family there. And then he looks at the boy, the chief's son. And then he says to that chief's son, why don't we go out? Why don't you come along with me? And we'll go hunt. Come and help me. I think I know where I can shoot a deer, kill a deer. So he takes out that son of the Odawa chief, and they go out. The Odawa comes back, and he was unsuccessful. And then he says, where's our friend? Oh, he went hunting too. And where's my son? Oh, he went with him. Okay. So then they come back. They're unsuccessful as well. So the next day again, they try the same thing. And at this time, the Odawa has to go further. So they're going further and further from their camp. So they end up staying away longer. Anyway, this Nottoway comes back one day, and he has meat. He has all this meat, and he tells the woman to cook this meat up to make a soup. He says, I finally was blessed. He says, I was finally blessed. We got some meat, make some soup. So they cook that meat up, they make soup, and here they come back. The Odawa chief comes back, and they're all eating. And he says, the Nottoway says to him, have some soup. And he says, the Odawa chief says, I think I'll hold off. And he says, where's my son? And then they say, oh, he went, we don't know where he is. They come to think of it, they said, I don't know where he is. So then they start looking around for him. And then that's when the chief realized that that's who was in the soup. The Nottoway was the one that cooked them up and had everyone eat them. So that story is still told in Wacomico. That's not the whole story. That's just telling you that. But the thing that I did found in my research, I looked up a fellow named Alexander Chamberlain, and he has a collection of stories that he collected from what the reserve is now called Scugog by Port Perry, Ontario. And he did this around the turn of the century, this Alexander Chamberlain. And they had a similar story, where the two are hunting, Anishinaabe and the Nottoway, and the Nottoway goes and kills the son of the Anishinaabe. And then, but in that version, he actually puts the head in front of the Anishinaabe Ojibwe chief of the son. And then he says, look what I got you to eat. So in this version, the guy says he ate it just to show how brave he was. So then the next day, what he says, the Ojibwe chief says to that Nottoway chief, I'm going to go hunting. I need a helper. Bring your son. I'm going to take your son. So he does the same thing. he kills him, that son, and then he puts the Ottawa son's head on the platter, and he comes back and he says, now your turn to eat. And of course, that Ottawa is crying away, and he ends up eating his son's head too. Whether those really literally happened is another story. Like, did Samson really knock down the temple? These are kind of the stories that end up happening. Anyway, the third source that I've read is a manuscript by George Gaveose, and they anglicize the name. They say Gaveose, and another say Kavosa, because it's spelled like I was talking about yesterday, these orthographies, where they use different letters to represent different sounds. But Gaveose also mentions the wars we had with the Nautiluc, and then how the Nautiluc come from a snake, and then also this charge of cannibalism. That's the story that we have. Anyway, so in Stephen George's story, he says that's why the Nautiluc ended up chasing the Ogawa all around, and trying to chase all the Ogawa, and that's why the Anishinaabe wanted to fight them. The fourth archival source, I guess I shouldn't refer to Stephen as an archive, but I guess I could. That the fourth source is in the Bell papers, and these are Robert Bell, who worked for the Canadian Geologic Survey, and around the turn of the century again. Robert Bell actually was a fellow who got worked with the Canadian Geologic Service, but he ended up getting interested in what he called Indian legends. So then he would visit people on the island here, and he would ask them, and he would write down the story by dictation. And then after he left, he says, if you write me some stories, I'll pay you. So some of the Anishinaabe wrote in some stories. Anyway, one fellow that he talked to was Arthur Nidowa son. We would say Nidowa son. But in the anglicized version, Manitowa son is the name. And this was the son of Bebonse, who was somehow descended from Shamaswe at the Lacroche Band, which ended up becoming the Whitefish River Band, or Laws Canada. Anyway, he wrote in there, he didn't write the whole story because his bell was doing the dictation here. And what Nidowa son says is, Mohawk eats the Ojibwe. The Ojibwe don't like that. That's why they went to war. So that's the summation of why we had these wars. So I'm telling our story, our version here, but just to tell you their version, they say the same thing of us. So I met a fellow from Atlasosne, and this fellow from Atlasosne, his name is Darren Bonaparte, and I met him at a conference about the War of 1812, and he had his wampum belts out, and he also was to deliver a presentation. And so I said, good to meet you, who are you? I didn't know him at the time, and he didn't know me, so we started talking, shook hands. And then I said, where are you from? And he says, Atlasosne. I says, you're a Mohawk. And he says, how about you? And I says, I'm from Chigi, Manitoulin, Anishinaabe. And then he says to me, a baby eater. So they have the same charge against us. So there's the oral tradition of this war was in that. So I've been trying to think about that more, what that means, but I haven't really gotten further with that per se. But that's the story of why we went to war. But you read any of the popular literature, there's no real mention of that. The mention is that usually the Nautiluc had run out of beaver in their country, and so they wanted to extend their territory and get more luxuriant fur-bearing animals. And in their territory, south of Lake Ontario, the climate wasn't conducive to a beaver's fur getting as thick and luxurious as it was up here. So the beaver that they were trapping, the story goes, isn't as, they weren't getting as good a deal when they were trading. So one of the theories is that that's why they ended up, once they got guns and stuff, they wanted to expand, is they then decided that they're going to get this beaver north of Lake Ontario and north of Lake Huron, and that's why they expanded, and they ended up, usually the other thing they would do is they'd ambush people going to Montreal on the Odawa River. And, but they did come up here as well on excursions, and they went all the way out to Iroquois Falls, of course, and that's why it's called Iroquois Falls. And they also went up towards James Bay. Our story here, then the other story of that is that it's called the Morning Wars again, and I talked about this briefly yesterday, the Morning Wars, that when the Haudenosaunee lost a lot of people due to the war, but mostly due to disease. They had to replenish their population, and because of the smallpox and other diseases, their populations were decimated. So that's how they ended up repopulating themselves, was going to war and getting captives, and I talked about that yesterday, that it's not open going on the war path, but really seeking captives is what the word literally translates to. Anyway, so those are the different explanations of why the so-called Beaver Wars or the Mohawk Wars happened. But for us, we say that it was this charge of cannibalism, but you don't see that in the written record that as a cause for the war.
And those ancient animosities, as you described it, and the stories or the oral histories that vilify your historic enemies, which of course is reciprocated as you described it by them as well. Do you have any indication of when this might have been occurring? And I get that you're not talking about a single incident, but rather...
Yeah, it was a prolonged period, a long time. But like I mentioned, the 1649 was the date 1649 was a watershed event in the history of Canada, and everyone, most history books will mention that. But prior to that, this was when they were starting to fight. And a lot of times too, what you read is that they started to fight because it was alliances towards, or at the urging of the French or the English, because they wanted the fur. So others talk about Champlain's influence. But when we listen to that kind of logic, the danger is that we end up assuming that we're always the puppets of the colonial authority, that we had no real agency. But to I guess counter that is to really look more deeper into our motivations, the Anishinaabe people's motivations, and the Haudenosaunee motivations, and how that's recorded in our version of history. So what I wanted to mention as well about that, yesterday there was a woman here by the name of Esther Jocko who heard these stories as well from her grandparents. And then I heard this from a friend of mine too, that right across this island here, Great Lacrosse Island, and now where these bell rocks are situated, further down, there's a place there called Nodaway. And Nodaway is a Haudenosaunee man. Nodawens is a boy, a young man, or it could be a diminutive Mohawk. But Nodawens means a young or a small Nodaway. But Nodaway, there's a little point there, And they had a story there that after these wars, one boy was left there. He survived the battle, and that's why they call that place ONSC, right on the next island over here. When you drive across the bridge on that bridge across the island, there's a point that's called ONSC, and that's where this young boy was left. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that again, like I said, I read a lot, but there was a linguist by the name of Leonard Bloomfield, a pioneering linguist who studied Ojibwe at Ann Arbor. And what he did was he would bring down speakers of Ojibwe, and he would have these classes and sessions, and some of his students, they would sit around the speaker, and the speaker would talk, and they would transcribe what that speaker is saying. So there's a couple of publications. One is a lady named Angela Williams, Bidasagekwe, and they published those stories in the late 1990s. Current linguist named John Nichols published those. We transcribed them, or I should say the technical term is transliterated them from Bloomfield's phonetic transcription. Nichols then transliterated them into the Fierro writing system and then published them in there. Similarly, Nichols compiled a book called an Ojibwe Text Anthology. And one of the other people that went down to Ann Arbor to visit Leonard Bloomfield was Greater McGregor from Weewaskinaga, from Birch Island. And he went down there, and there's recordings of him talking in Ojibwe. And when he's telling various stories, and then those stories got published in the Ojibwe Text Anthology. Again, it was Nichols who did the transliteration from the phonetic system into the double vowel orthography. In there, he talks about a place called Anishinaabe Nation, and now we call that place Willisville, Ontario. And so all of you that drove here to Lukern passed by that. But Willisville is the old town, but if you're on the water, there's a place there now that's commonly called Alligator Rock, and that's on the Whitefish River. And Greater McGregor told the story, but this story is also in those Robert Bell papers. So the other story that's popularly told here, that's still told around here, is called Nadaweojing. And so there's a dispute about what this name means, but now it's called in English Mount McBee. But so some say it's not Nadaweojing, it's Nadaweojing. And if it's Nadaweojing, Gojing means he's hanging. So the story is that Nadaweojing, Nadawe is hanging there. And so the story goes that when the Nadawe came to attack the people around what is now called Segmont First Nation, the Anishinaabe ambushed them. And they ended up putting up their heads on a pole. So that's what some people say, that's why that mountain is called Nadaweojing. But one of the words that's fallen into this use here is Wajju. The Ojibwe say Wajju, and then the Anishinaabe say Ajiu, and that's a word for a mountain. And then when you say that, Nadaweojing, but when you make it a locative suffix, Nadaweojing, you make it's Nadawe mountain. That's what that's called. So this is an old tactic the Anishinaabe had. They would lure them. They would lure the Nadawe. And I'll go back to this Shidakisini first. A Shidakisini, the way McGregor translated is, it's connected to a rock. It lies connected to a rock. Object in there means a rock. We say now, Beijing Wabik Nagadahan. That's what you got $1. Nijwal Nagadan, $2. We asked it. We don't say too many, but so Alvik means a metal or a mineral. So when we say Anishinaabe, it's leaning against or it's connected to a rock. And then that Kissimmee is where it's again lying there. So that's what he said that word means. It lies connected to the rock. And he wasn't too sure what exactly is like lying connected to the rock there. Another fellow told that story, and it was to Reverend Frost. And Reverend Frost was a missionary stationed at Shegunda, and he also wrote that story down in the bell papers. Anyway, there's a rock there and it comes straight down. It's a sheer bluff, and then it has a crevice inside. And in that crevice inside, there's a platform there. And in that, what Gregor McGregor says in there, the Salvik, and that the Salvik means it's flat, it's a flat rock. So he says right there, in one version of this story, they put They put a woman Anishinaabe there and her daughter standing there. So when the Nautiway came up, paddling up, they saw that woman and her daughter, and they wanted to capture her. But what they didn't know was that the Anishinaabe on top were on top, and they had put all these big rocks up there. They had all their bows and arrows and spears, and they were waiting for them. So all these Nautiway come up to that place, Shidap-Kissimmee, and they're going to capture that woman and her daughter. And then all the Anishinaabe on top start throwing these rocks down. And in this version of the story, they say the Nautiway used elm bark canoes. They didn't use birch bark canoes, they used elm bark. And when those rocks hit that elm bark, they just busted up more easily than a birch would. A birch would withstood some punishment, not too much. But these elm bark ones, they're heavier and they're slower. So that's what in the story, these things bust up. And so the warriors on top of that rock start shooting with their arrows and their rocks. They start killing them. And then that's when some of the Nautiway that are actually surviving try to crawl onto that rock. And then that lady has a war club there too. And so she starts killing those that try to climb onto the rock. So they have an all-out victory. And usually what they do is they save one. They save one. And they say they outfit him, but they maim him. They maim him, either cut off his ears or cut off his nose. And then, but what they do then, after they've maimed him, they outfit him. They make him a nice canoe, maybe nice moccasins, and load him up with food, and they give him a blanket, and they give him enough food to get home. And then when they loaded him all up, they put him in that canoe, and they give him a push, and they say, tell your people to come back. Tell your people to come back. This is what will happen. So that's in these stories, that's usually how it ends. They maim one, they let one survive, and they tell them, come back. This is what will happen again. So that's at Shidap-Kissimmee. And over there, there's a pictograph there of a lake snake. And these lake snakes are mid-oak. And I don't want to say their name in Ojibwe. I'm hoping they don't understand English, because we don't want to call them those ones. But that's why they call it Alligator Rock. The Jagnash call it Alligator Rock. Because that's what we say in our language, what the same word would be. But those ones are spirits, those snakes. And in dire times, Anishinaabe relied on them during war. And that's why we would paint that on that rock to honor and say, this is who helped us. This is who helped us defeat the Nodaway here. So that's why that painting is up there. And it's since some of it's been defaced, but there's other parts that are there. But anyway, it's that's what they call that alligator rock now in English. But it's because of that, and in the name in the Ojibwe, it would be translated to lake snake. But that's who they relied upon in that version. They summoned that spirit to help them vanquish the Nodaway. And that's what the Anishinaabe always do. They rely on those spirits to help them. So then when they went up to the other story, there's a number of versions of this story at Nodaway and Nodaway. And for that, they went to a place now it's called Waikajawang. But Waikajawang means the current goes back and forth. It's changing. And now it's called Little Detroit, and it's south of Algoma Mills on Lake Huron. So it's the same thing. The story is that a chief and his son were in a canoe, and they had sent scouts out, and the scouts had seen the Nodaway war party on canoe. So the chief said he'll act as a decoy, and he'll lead them to Waikajawang. And then that Waikajawang is two bluffs together, and there's a passageway there where the water runs through. And again, it's high, craggy rock. I went there, and when they went through, that's when the Anishinaabe came out, and again they threw rocks and they shot them all up. But there's the way the rocks are, you can actually stand there, and I've stood there, there are pictures, I went there, and you stand there in behind that rock, and you're actually sheltered. So if somebody shoots at you, you got a bit of a shelter. So if the Nodaway turned around and fired their arrows at the Anishinaabe, it would be largely ineffective. So anyway, the chief and his son led them through there. And then as they got through, the Anishinaabe came and they just slaughtered them there again. And again, they saved them. But the way this story goes here is that when they killed all these Nodaway there at Little Detroit, Waikajawang, that their bodies sank and their bones eventually sank to the bottom. Their bodies sank to the bottom, and they decomposed, and their bones went to the bottom. Now there's a lake on top of that Mount McBean called Nodaway. And when you go up there, what the Anishinaabe said, they went up there, and on that lake, all strewn along the shore are bones. And they wondered what had happened. Why all these bones are on top of the lake on Mount McBean at Nodaway. So, what the Anishinaabe believe, or I should say what the Anishinaabe know, is that there's all these subterranean tunnels under the earth. Well, of course, subterranean means under the earth. But anyway, all these tunnels are under the lake, and this is those spirits throughways. This is how these guys travel. They travel all through these tunnels. And I talked about yesterday, Nidawaning. There's a throughway or a cave that connects Mantuani Bay with South Bay. And when you travel to Kumkam and you go on that highway, you're actually driving over that tunnel. Anyway, these guys are, they killed those Nodaway, and then these bones appear on top at that lake. And so it was kind of a mystery in a sense, but they knew that there's that tunnel there again. And that's where all these little garden, these different snakes and underwater snakes. So at Algoma Mills, eventually a sawmill gets established there. And then when they add the sawmill, then all the shavings, the ones that they don't actually use, they all get waterlogged, and then some of them sink to they become like driftwood. And then people reported that if you went up to that Nottoway Lake later, and you get to the top, all around the shoreline of that lake, Nottoway Lake, on top of Mount McBean, will be all that sawdust and the cuttings from the sauna. So again, those went under that tunnel and came up to that lake. So that's why I believe the word is Nottoway rather than Nottoway. One further point on that. In 1852, George Ironside was the visiting superintendent stationed at Nantwani. And then he wrote up the requisition for the bands that signed Robinson Huron Treaty. And on that requisition, he says, for a non-citizen owning a reserve at Nottoway, and he spelled it with O-O-Z-H-I-I-N-G instead of Nottoway, Gojin. Gojin, you need a G in there to say that it's hanging. But he put Nottoway and Ojin. That's where he says, owning a reserve at Nottoway. Next one, it says on that same, different requisition, it says for Sean Nosway, owning a reserve at the Shadop-Kissimmee. So they said owning a reserve at Shadop-Kissimmee. So what I found significant is that after the 1850 treaty, these two chiefs identified their places where these significant battles had occurred and victories had occurred with Nottoway. But subsequently, we call it Sagmont and Whitefish River after. But on those two particular requisitions, it's written the Shadop-Kissimmee as well as Nottoway. So the reason I'm telling those stories about that is, again, the idea of Anishinaabe history and place and ownership. And then also, when you think further about it, these guys are getting their annuity, and on their annuity form, the requisition form, it says at the Shadop-Kissimmee and Nottoway. And it's, again, our place names are important because they carry our history. And if you know what a Shadop-Kissimmee means, then you're going to say, well, what is line connected to the rock? And so one of the theories of what's line connected to the rock is that middle, that spirit. And then with Nottoway, if you know what's Nottoway, you know that it means Nottoway Mom. And then if you know that it's Nottoway Mom, you'll say, well, why did they call it Nottoway Mom? And then that's when you learn the story. So again, with Anishinaabe people, we didn't actually say, well, in 1632, the chief here ended up luring a band of Nottoway, a war party of Nottoway. We didn't record our history like that. We didn't use the years, the Julian calendar, we didn't use them. We used the place, we used the land, and we used our story. That's how we record our history.
The Mohawk Wars, as you call them, I gathered them, or I should ask, are there corresponding stories from the Anishinaabe side of any feats? Typically, those don't get are there in your oral history recordings of Anishinaabe suffering defeat? You told us about some of the victories.
We never lost.
Pardon?
We never lost. No, usually that's what like I was saying, the first part was when our oral tradition is that we did get pushed back west. We got pushed back west, and these were when we lost. And then the charges of cannibalism, that was the other one where we lost. And then that's what some of the storytellers have said. The word they say, "Be not Kweewalk," Anishinaabe. The Anishinaabe then resisted, fought back, and then repelled them. But there's another good story Alexander Henry has recorded, the fur trader, and also a chief named Kawaga, and it's called Point Iroquois, which is just southwest of Baltic, of Sault Ste. Marie. And it's the same thing where the Anishinaabe ends up defeating the Nodawit, and they have a total victory, and then all the bones that are strewn about there, and that's why it's called, in our language, Nodawit-Ogani. Nodawit-Ogani. And Ogan is a bone. Place that you call bones. That's what that place is called. But the story of it is interesting. It's kind of beyond what we're talking here, but what's really interesting is if you look at how Kawaga tells that story and how Alexander Henry records it, and Anna Jameson also wrote a version of that as well. And you compare those two, and you see how the element that's missing in Henry's version and in Jameson's version, that Kawaga puts great emphasis on, is that the chief ended up employing Jiskil Minok. And a Jiskil Minok is now what we call a shaking tent conductor or a shaman. And these guys could change their shape. So as scouts, they changed their shape and they became an otter and a beaver. And they went and they detected these, the Nottoway war party coming up, and they had changed into the beaver and otter. And as they were coming up, they followed them and they went ahead, this otter and beaver, and they told everyone, the Nottoway are coming, the Nottoway are coming. And so they collected a war party. They said, go over to Bald Lake, and then we'll meet them. We'll have a battle with them over there. And so that's what Kawaga emphasized, was this part of the story where the spirit intercedes, where the men beseech their personal helpers or their personal middle to assist them and to transform themselves into the spirit of the otter and the beaver, and then to go ahead and to alert everybody, and then amass a force at what is now called Point Iroquois, and then that's when they were able to effect a victory. But that's the part that gets tilted out of non-native history. Whenever the spirit is involved, for us, that's the important part of our history. But when it's recorded in textbooks, that's the part that's on the cutting enemy floor that doesn't get included.
I want you to move on beyond the war that eventually ended. But I think I just got a note here that your mic needs new batteries, so perhaps we can just pause briefly.
All right. Where do those notes come from? Weird. All right, someone taking care of that.
This one?
Mr. Worm, if you'll let me know when a suitable time is for
This could be as well as any.
Why don't we take 10 minutes then?
Yeah.
And,
All rise. This court is on recess for 10 minutes. This court has resumed. Please be seated.
Thank you for that break, Your Honor. We were able to change batteries and take a morning break. May I proceed? Thank you, Your Honor.
Don, can I mention two things? Yesterday, I had brought up that Mokmanish had signed the 1836 treaty with an X. And when I got home last night, my wife had said, "You didn't finish, you just left it at that." And you said you were going to say what you thought. So, about that 1836 treaty, the other chiefs all signed with their Doda, and it's only Mokmanish who signs with an X. And what some have said, because Mokmanish clearly could have drawn his Wasi Doda, his brown bullhead Doda on there, but he didn't. And then some had suggested that he actually wrote his name. But looking at the handwriting, although I'm not a handwriting expert, the name Mokmanish looks like it's written in Thomas Gomersall Anderson's handwriting on that treaty. It looks like it to me. But the X on there for sure is done in a different hand. And usually what a number of people have said is, they take that to mean, I put my X here because it's provisional. It's not, I'm not fully convinced. I agree in principle, but not all the way. And the others that put their name and their Doda, they're like, I'm fine with everything in this. So what needs further research with Mokmanish is why he signed that treaty with an X. The other thing that I wanted to clarify, I had lost my train of thought, was when you had asked about being invited to these talks and these presentations that I gave. Yeah. So the government and its various agencies and its various employees contact me to do these presentations in their buildings. Other Native communities also ask me to invite me to go to their community. And like I said, I don't go there, I don't go up knocking and say, do you want a presentation? I don't do that. But the other thing that I had mentioned, and here's again where I trailed off, I lost my train of thought. I shouldn't say I lost my train of thought. It actually, I talked then about Anishinaabe at the conference, and I said that one is was self-invitational because we were organizers. That was why I'm included in that particular conference. However, the conferences such as Ethno History Conference or the Algonquin Conference, you don't get invited to those, or to the Native American Indigenous Studies Association Conference. So for example, we actually have to write a proposal, an abstract, and submit that abstract to the conference organizers, the host committee. And then the host committee looks at all these different abstracts, and then they decide, we'll accept your abstract and you can come and present at this conference. So there's a level of competition to go to those kind of academic conferences such as NASA, Native American Indigenous Studies Association, Ethno-History Conference, Algonquian Conference, and NASA, NAASA, Native American Studies Association Conference. Those ones you actually have to submit an abstract, and then the committee goes through all these abstracts that are submitted, and then they decide, yes, we want you to come and speak. It's a worthy topic. And the other one is the Canadian Historical Association that I've delivered a couple of presentations to as well. And so right now, actually, November 1st is the deadline for the Canadian Historical Association conference coming up in the spring. And we're putting together a couple of colleagues of mine and I are working on a proposal now and sending in our abstracts and then having an overarching abstract for our panel. Whether or not we get accepted isn't up to us. It's a competition.
And the competitive process that you just described is not unlike peer review, is it?
Correct.
Thank you for that clarification. You had described what you had called the Mohawk Wars or the Iroquois Wars. Can you carry on with that? Ultimately, that came to a conclusion, and then how did that happen?
So you had mentioned did we ever lose, and of course we did lose. The other corollary or a bit of a tangent on this is we called the Haudenosaunee people Nodaway. And then when the Ojibwe people started moving west, we encountered a new group of people that in our language we call them Boan. Boana. Boan. B-W-A-A-N. Boan. And that's a Sioux. And now there's people called Assiniboine. But that's a Assiniboine. Assiniboine. And that's supposed to mean they roast things with stones. They use stones to roast. They would heat them up, then they cook them in the water, and that's how they cooked it. Assiniboine. And then ours, for the other Sioux, Boana. But when we had encountered them earlier on, we called them Nodaway-Sis. And then some say Nodaway-Sis, but some say Nodaway-Sut. And Nodaway means little adders. Remember that they called the snake the enemy? So the way it's told is that we consider the Haudenosaunee the big enemy or the greater enemy, and the Nodaway Sioux, this gets called, they end up in the written record as Nodaway Sioux, and then after that, that's how they end up getting the name Sioux. That has nothing to do with their designation, and it's the Ojibwe word was misspelled by the French, and it was called Nodaway Sioux, and then they ended up chopping the word in half and taking the Nodaway out of it, and they just ended up saying, these guys are called the Sioux. But it was Nodaway, that meaning it was supposed to be a diminutive form, our little enemies, in comparison to the Nodaway, the Haudenosaunee. So on either side of us, we had two enemies. The Sioux that are called the Sioux now, the Lakota, Nakota, and Dakota, and here the Nodaway or Haudenosaunee, the Six Nations. Those were on either side of us, our historic enemies. And so one was called Nodaway, and the other was called Nodaway-Sut. So they're the little ones, but it got written and rendered as Nodaway Sioux, and then that's why they call them the Sioux people. So it's a bit, that's just a bit of word history there, in that sense. So we did lose battles, of course, and then that's why we persisted and persevered. And for us, there's also stories from Perry Island about the Nodaway. And one story Diamond Jeunesse had recorded, had written that story down. And at that point, she said the Nottoway were prevailing on us. They were winning the war. And then they said that she said if this was her, she says the Nottoway thunder was matching the Anishinaabe Ojibwe thunder. So if you really think about that, it's a spiritual war. They're beseeching their middle, the Nottoway, ask their thunderbirds to come and strike ours. And so this war is going on in the physical realm, where the Nottoway and the Anishinaabe are meeting on the battlefield, and they're fighting it out. But also the who we call Jiskiyunene, they're also waging a battle through the spirits, and their shaman, what they would call, they call them shamans, so-called shamans, are fighting our medicine people. And it's through these thunderbirds that are fighting. And so, with the story Jeunesse had recorded from Perry Allen, he says, then they called one fellow, and I won't say his name, but he lives under where all the Great Lakes connect. Somewhere up around Sault Ste. Marie, they summoned him. And he said, and when he swam, he went right straight across Lake Huron, down to Perry Island, Perry Sound area, and it was just like now, of course, we think of a motorboat or a speedboat, it just left a wake and waves. He came right across, right straight, swimming straight across the Lake Huron. And then he went down through the tunnels, and then he emerged out by what is now called Toronto, Credit River area, where there was a battle going on. And then it was that underwater creature that ended up prevailing and defeating the Nottoway thunder. So again, that was in the Perry Allen recordings, or historical account. It was our reliance on an underwater middle that assisted us again in defeating the Nottoway. So this is a recurring theme again, and like I had said earlier, you're not going to read about that in the history textbook, in Ontario Ministry approved history textbook in grade 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, or 12. So, and then this is going to get called folklore. But to us, that's the integral part of history. As Anishinaabe people, these people that end up attaining this type of power or blessing is through repeated fasting to ask for that gift, to ask for that blessing. And that, so when we say that it's folklore, that diminishes that person's efforts in his or her lifetime to commune with the Spirit and to actually attain that blessing. So we're diminishing that person's fasting when we say that's not a real story. But it is when you believe in that Spirit and you work with that Spirit. I'm not saying I do, but I'm just saying that in our past and even in our present, and no doubt in our future, our people will continue to work and have worked with the Spirit and rely on that Spirit, those spirits, to assist us to get through hard times, dire times. And so that, back then, that's what and that's recorded, Mary Sullivan, and then also Jonas King and Francis Peguagalo. Those were his main informants at Perry Island, Wasauksing. Wasauksing is the Anishinaabe name for that reserve. And they are also signatories to this Robinson Huron Treaty. And again, they're the ones who let Diamond Jeunesse write down those stories. And there's a consonance and a theme. You see that this kind of theme in these stories is in the collection that was collected by Alexander Chamberlain at School, and then written in English by George Gavelse. His English is broken, but he's got a manuscript there, and it's in my report. I use that as a source in my report. And so Gavelse talks about that as well. The Norway Wars and the Ojibwe and Norway. These had a real, these two fought each other a lot. So when they're fighting, they could physically fight and duke it out, but only really to prevail, it was when they depended upon the Spirit, and the Spirit's intercession is then what they ended up attaining victory. So, and then if you read some of the Jesuit archives, and that's what the Jesuit relations, and what they say of the Nipissing people, and then that's what the Haudenosaunee say of the Nipissing people, and also the Anishinaabe people. They're great sorcerers. That's what they said of us. They are great sorcerers. So that's why they feared us as well. We weren't sorcerers, though. But that's the way the French Jesuits rendered that. Really, what they're saying about us is we're a spiritually powerful people. That's what that means. So to deny that in our history is doing a disservice to the efforts of those people that actually attained that blessing and that power. Because not everybody can do that. When you fast, some people can fast for 10 years in a row, and they may not get visited by a thunderbird. Maybe they get visited by a bear or an otter, or maybe they don't get visited at all. And so they continue to fast. And in fact, if you read Peter Jones' history, he recounts that when he was a young man, Peter Jones was a Methodist missionary, but he was actually a Mississauga Anishinaabe from the Credit River. His father was a Yadanash, the surveyor Augustus Jones. And Augustus Jones had a wife, Talanina was his wife's name, and she was a Mississauga. But Peter Jones was raised with his mother's people, and he went out and fasted. So he fasted, and then he said that he never received a blessing. And so what Donald Smith, the biographer of Peter Jones, says is what he suspects is that that's one of the reasons that Peter Jones went on to become a Methodist missionary, because he didn't receive that blessing at that time. That would be a possible explanation of that, he says. So the point being, some people can fast without receiving a blessing, and others do receive a blessing, and then they continue to work to get more blessings in order to help the people. So that's a part of our lives, continues to be a part of our lives, was a part of our lives, and that affected our history.
Having the intercession by the spirits, as you described it to us, there was a decisive victory at the New Credit area. Did I understand you right?
Correct. And there was also another decisive victory out by the Rice Lake area and Gananakwi. So that's what some people say. Gananakwi means Gananakwi. In our language, we say where he fought. And out by Kingston, Gananakwi, that's what supposedly that name means. Gananakwi, Anishinaabe. The Anishinaabe fought back there. He resisted. So there was a number of those victories, and then that's when they asked us for peace. The Haudenosaunee asked us for peace. They didn't want to fight us anymore. And so the way we effect peace is through the offering of wampum. So they offered us a wampum belt, and there's a recording. It's written down that a delegation came up to Sault Ste. Marie, and they brought 8 belts. And then also later on, they're according to the Peter Jones history, they also came up again to Sault Ste. Marie, the ball thing, a delegation of not white Haudenosaunee people. And then when they had done that, they had asked for peace. So if you pull up that slide, and I'll pull up this wampum belt.
Your Honor, perhaps while Mr. Corbiere is readying the demonstrative aid, I can simply point out that on the screen there is a photographic depiction of 2 wampum belts which he will display for the court. What we would be proposing is that since he will be referring to them and talking about them and describing their creation and so on for us, that if we could have that photograph made an exhibit.
And is it already in the material? Is it already in Mr. Corbiere's material?
I'm not certain that these particular ones are in the material. I've raised it with my friends. I don't think that there was an issue, given that it was simply a demonstrative aid to assist us all in having the tactile experience, if I can put it that way, and to see it in real life, in real time.
We did discuss it, another exhibit seems to be the most appropriate.
And will they be identified then? Well, for the purposes of the lettered exhibit, what should we call it?
Demonstrative, Mr. Corbiere's demonstrative aid, would that be?
Well, how about something like a photo of 2 wampums, but do the wampums have any particular way they're identified? That we know yet? Not yet, okay.
I understand there are some photos in exhibits in the main report.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, they are right in there, Your Honor.
These ones are.
You'll find those at Exhibit C. At Exhibit C to Mr. Corbiere's affidavit.
These precise ones? No.
No. And perhaps if we had Mr. Corbiere explain them, that we will find an acceptable way to identify them. Is that fair, Your Honor?
Yes, please.
Maybe you can go to the selected text that Peter Jones had published. So there's 2 written versions of these belts.
This you will find, Your Honor, at page 18, paragraph 34 of Mr. Corbiere's affidavit.
So if you scroll down to the actual,
And it continues on page 19 as well, yes.
So this was written by Peter Jones, and then the other version also was from of a letter council. So firstly, the council fire at the Sault Ste. Marie has no emblem because then the council was held. Secondly, the council fire as Manitoulin has the emblem of a beautiful white fish. This signifies purity or a clean white heart, that all our hearts ought to be white towards each other. Thirdly, the emblem of a beaver placed at an island on Penetanguishene Bay denotes wisdom, that all the acts of our fathers were done in wisdom. Fourthly, the emblem emblem of a white deer placed at Asimco signified superiority. The dish and ladles at the same place indicated abundance of game and food. Fifthly, the eagle perched on a tall pine tree at the credit denotes watching and swiftness in conveying messages. The eagle was to watch all the council fires between the Six Nations and the Ojibways, and being farsighted, he might, in the event of anything happening, communicate the tidings of the distant tribes. Sixthly, the sun was hung up in the center of the belt to show that their acts were done in the face of the sun, by whom they swore that they would forever after observe the treaties made between the two parties. So if you could go back to the picture. In one of the notes, they say that the wampum belt has, bisecting it, a white line of wampum denoting the road of peace. This is in a description of the belt. And then they said, also on the belt are representations of 5 wigwams. So, me being a literal person, I opted to look at it in a different way. So if you see the bottom belt there,
For the record, you're describing the belt with the set of 5 diamond shapes.
yeah. So the belt with the 5 diamond shapes, you see that it has the road of peace, the white road of peace going through, bisecting the belt from one end to the other. And I had asked a Mohawk fella named Ken Miracle to assist me in making this belt, because we no longer know where the original is, and we've never seen, or I haven't seen, I should say, an original depiction of this belt. One thing we do know is that even though the belt says that our ancestors placed a white fish at Manitoulin Island and placed a beaver in an island at Hennessy Bay, and a white reindeer or white deer at the Narrows, and an eagle on top of a pine tree at the River Credit, we know that our ancestors wouldn't have literally tried to depict each of those animals on the belt. That realistic or anamorphic representation occurred only later when we started using the smaller beads to depict things. But on wampum belts, rarely did we use anamorphic or zoomorphic, I should say zoomorphic figures or anthropomorphic figures till later on. So there wouldn't have been any zoomorphic figures on these belts. It's the symbols that show that, and it's the top that the keeper of the belt, and as well as somebody on the side who gave the belt, are to retain that information. So on the bottom belt, I asked Ken Miracle, who was a Mohawk, how would you make this belt then? And he says, well, for us, nations are denoted by diamonds. And then in subsequent readings I've done, I've seen that that's true, that they use diamonds to represent a nation. And then I modified it when I told him, I says to him, well, when you make this, and this was just to be used as a teaching tool, and I said to him, in the middle of each diamond, could you put in an equilateral cross then? And for us, the Anishinaabe people, an equilateral cross represents the 4 directions. And that's an organizing principle that we use in a lot of our teachings, and the teachings that I used to hear this old man talk about, that 4 directions. So that's why I put that in there. I was just thinking of that, those teachings that the old man used to talk about. Anyway, it turns out, remember I was talking about Darren Bonaparte, the Akwesasne Mohawk I met, who had wampum belts. And when he did his talk, he had a different belt, but on that belt it had that equilateral cross, and he said that represents fire to him. So I said, oh, it's kind of happily worked out. But we ended up with the thinking about the sixth, when they said 6, we placed in the middle of the belt was a moon of Wampa. And so we asked a colleague, a friend of mine named Rick Hill, who is recognized as one of their knowledgeable people at Six Nations. He was Seneca, worked in the museums for a number of years, and a very smart man. And also trained in their longbows. But he thinks that it would have been woven into the belt. But the way, like I said, I'm a literal person at times, says that, and we affixed a moon of Wampum to the note of the sun. So that actual, on that belt there, we decided to actually put a moon of Wampum there, a gorgeous shell. So the bottom one was made by Ken Miracle, and it was used the diamonds and the road and the equilateral crosses to represent the fire. So that's how our ancestors would have used that as a mnemonic device to recall who was placed where. But now, if you look at the top belt, a friend of mine named Brian Charles, Anishinaabe from Georgina Island First Nation, which is just north of Toronto and in Lake Simcoe. Him and I were, he actually makes belts. He taught himself to make these belts, and he's made quite a number of belts now, so he's getting quite proficient at it. But with the design, we thought that I was literally reading what Peter Jones had written, and he said, on there are the depiction of 5 wigwams. So I thought a diamond doesn't really convey a sense of a wigwam, but if you look at from above a wigwam, you could make the case that a hexagon would represent a wigwam from a bird's eye view. So that's why I decided, I told Brian, I would think that these would have been 5 hexagons represented there. And so he ended up deciding that, and he says the first diamond, if you look on the screen at the right hexagon has says there would be no emblem there. So he decided to actually put the diamond and fill the diamond right in there. And I thought, well, okay, that'll be all right. But I think when they said there was no emblem, I would have left that one blank, but I didn't think it. Anyway, the next hexagon represents Manitoulin Island, and the white fish that was placed there, and the council fire that was ignited that was to burn forever. And so that's why that diamond inside actually has the equilateral cross inside, if you can tell. So it looks like it's just a hollow diamond, but actually that hollow diamond is supposed to represent the fire inside, so that it's the council fire of the white fish. And then thirdly is that council fire ignited at an island in Penetanguishene Bay, and that Penetanguishene Bay had a beaver placed there denoting wisdom. And then that council fire was to burn forever as well. And then they bypassed that moon of wampum, and then we went to the Narrows, and they said that the Narrows, in one version it says a white deer, but in the other version it says a white reindeer. So we believe it's that white deer is actually the reindeer, the caribou clan, and I was saying that in a little bit. But the reason now that looks more like a square with 2 sides is because in the text it says, and at the Narrows, our ancestors or our fathers placed there a dish, the dish with 1 spoon. And this is another treaty that the Haudenosaunee had extended to us and that we accepted. So this dish with 1 spoon is another Wampum Belt treaty between Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee people. So that's why in that particular hexagon, we placed that dish. Similarly, the next hexagon was that they said at the mouth of the Credit River, our ancestors placed on top of a tall pine tree an eagle. And our ancestors, our fathers, had also placed there the dish with one spoon, with a ladle. So that was why I said, well, put in those last two, put in a dish, the dish with one spoon inside there. And that's why this belt is a different design. It's because it's actually a reconstruction by Brian Charles and myself, based on our learnings to date. And then we used that moon of wampum. We actually took a wampum and we pasted on there. So my Haudenosaunee friend, Ken Miracle, made the bottom one. And some would argue that, and if we put a moon of wampum there, that would be a closer depiction, because the Mohawks, the Nunavut people, the Haudenosaunee people, were actually the ones that gave us the belt. They were the ones who made the belt. So the argument could be made that that's a truer form. But of course, like I said, nobody knows where this original is. And then so we decided that as a mnemonic aid for us, as a teaching aid for us now, this top one conveys that as well. Because to me, it kind of represents the idea that there's a depiction of 5 wigwams on there, whereas the diamonds don't really give a sense of wigwams. I get bigger diamonds to be nation as well. One thing to note here, while these two belts are up, is that the road goes right to the end. It isn't cut off. Like at the very extreme left and extreme right, there isn't a purple bead to terminate that road. And that conveys the idea of forever, that it keeps going on perpetuity. So that's why the road bisects and goes right through. But if it's cut off, then it conveys an idea of finiteness in there. So if you go to the next slide, I believe it will be a map.
Just before we go, what is the letter exhibit for that, please?
J.
So exhibit J, let me just ask, can I call that, it is a photograph of wampums, reconstructed wampums from the Haudenosaunee to the Anishinaabe. Sorry, and Jay?
It's getting a name, this belt, but I prefer your name. The reason, and I'll explain it, people have been calling it Yellowhead belt. And at that time when this was renewed in these councils, these councils, what I should have contextualized is these councils are actually recordings of when the Haudenosaunee came up to renew these belts with the Anishinaabe. So on the first day, John Smoke Johnson, who was Emily Johnson's, Pauline Johnson's grandfather, actually recited these belts. And the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee are having a council together, and they're deliberately doing this to renew their treaty. So John Smoke Johnson and John Buck are the keepers, and they get up and they recite this belt. The next day, Yellowhead gets up. Chief Yellowhead, or Meskwaki as he's known, at the Narrows, gets up, and then he recites this belt. So the other thing, that's why people end up calling this Yellowhead belt. But the reason I don't like that is it's cultural patrimony. It's not individual property. And when we start calling it Yellowhead belt, it gets associated with that family, and then they end up, what ends up happening, or this happened with the Covenant chain belt that I'm going to talk about. The Anishinaabe Museum kept referring to as a signal belt. And there's a kind of a reason for calling it a signal belt if you're a worker or curator at the Signal Museum. So then you can then say that's our belt. It belongs to the Signal Museum. But that belt was made before Signal was born. And he was a carrier of it, but it's not his. Likewise, this belt, Yellowhead was a carrier of the belt. He wasn't an owner of it. Same thing, on that, what I forgot to mention is that in the other transcript of this renewal, as I said, the line says to the effect, and our ancestors placed a white reindeer at the Narrows, and it was to him who these belts and the top was entrusted to. So they're saying that it's the Caribou clan that keeps these belts on behalf of the Anishinaabe. And that's why Meskwaki, who is of the, I think Totem, Caribou Totem, he's the one that is the entrusted keeper of that in that particular time period. I don't know who the belt was handed to after, or if it was his son. And like I said, we don't know what happened subsequently to that. But in that proceeding, it was specifically mentioned that it was a member of the Caribou clan who would be the carrier and keeper of this belt on behalf of the Anishinaabe. And that when the Haudenosaunee came to renew it, they recited their understanding of this belt first. And then the next day, the Anishinaabe recited it back. And that's how these were renewed. When you did it back and forth, you showed that you both had a mutual and shared understanding of what this treaty meant. So that's what we call wampum diplomacy, and also part of what we call wampum protocol, where the giver of the belt has to recite it to show that they still abide by it, and they still remember it, and then the receiver has to get up and recite it and say that they still abide by it as well. The other thing that I should mention is that at council they talked about that they smoked a pipe of peace as well. And then also that they then called each other brothers. And that as brothers, they weren't in a fight.
Before you go on, Mr. Corbiere, can you just tell us the process, the materials that those belts are made of, how it was acquired, what are the historical significance, if any, of the materials?
So, Your Honor, this here is actually a quail shell. And you see that the lip of it is purple. And this is a young one. Back in the days before all this pollution, these used to get bigger. And this is where we would get the purple wampum. So you see at the lip of this, that this purple wampum is more rare. And it's harder to get a bead out of this. So in that sense then, belts that were predominantly purple were harder to come by. This one is called a bulk shell. And if I smash this, inside is a straight tube. And that's where they have proboscis. And so both of these, of course, are bottom feeders on the bottom of the ocean. And then this one, how he feeds, sticks that out. And then that's how he's able to eat, bring that in. So these apparently are carnivorous as well. So it sounds funny to say that these shells are carnivorous, but they're actually feeding on carrion, I should say. So the one of the things is we take this tube out, and then you're able to cut that up, and then that's where you get they used to get the white bees. And then before the Jagnash came, or the Wentagosh came, our ancestors, or the Haudenosaunee people, and the Mi'kmaq people, Abenaki people, Wampanoag, all these people on the seaboard would then drill these. And I actually, last month, I went down to Six Nations and I was talking to an Abenaki woman named Marge Rushak. And she said what some of the museums are doing now is they're x-raying these beads on belts. And what they do, why they do that, is they can look at the size, the belt. Basically, an old belt will have non-uniform shaped beads because they're handmade. Each of the beads are handmade, so they couldn't be uniform. But then once they started mechanizing this, and the British and others started mass producing these beads, then you get more uniform beads. But then the other thing that they would do, they had the hand bowl drill to bore the hole. And why they x-ray it is one of these beads, if you try to stick that drill all the way through, oftentimes it would break the bead. So what they learned to do is go halfway on this side, turn it over, go halfway the other side. And then that's how they made their hole through the bead. And then, so that's why they're x-raying these. They want to see how old these are, to see if they're indigenously made, where the hand hole drill was used, and that two holes were used on either side. But when the English and the Europeans came, they had fine enough tools that we could just bore right through. So, and they had made more uniform ones. So the older belts would have long beads that were different sizes, different thickness, and then also they would have two holes drilled at either end to make the hole through. More recent belts would have more uniform beads, and then would have just a straight hole drilled through. But I was reading that I believe it was Jacques Cartier had asked, how do you get these dyed for these shells? And he was told by a native coin person there, says, no, we take one of our enemies, we capture them, and we cut them up. We cut their skin, we lacerate them, and then, I guess even before the mob came, they gave them the proverbial cement shoes, but it wasn't cement, of course. They anchored them, and they threw them in the river, St. Lawrence River, or in the ocean overnight. And then the next day they hauled them in. And then when they hauled them in, these, remember, are carrying Siki, and they latched on to all those wounds. And then they came, pulled them ashore, and they plucked them off. And what Jacques Cartier had written was that, I don't know if that story is true or not, but I talked to, again, Mark Rushak, I was mentioning that to her, I was kind of laughing, mentioning the cement shoes thing. And she says, no, that's true. So I didn't know that was true. Jacques Cartier thought they were pulling his leg just to scare him. But apparently that's how they got it. So on that, one thing that Rick Hill had shared with not just me, with a crowd, this is where we get white wampum, and this is where we get purple wampum. And he says there that what people, we don't want to get to arrange too much of a dichotomy, but basically purple belts are for war, white belts are for peace. So he says, if you look in the ocean, this whelk shell actually comes along and he bores a hole in this whale shell and he eats them. He sucks out the body of this. And he says, so even in the natural world, peace, the white shell, defeats war, the purple shell. So at the bottom of the ocean, these two are going on, they meet, this guy latches on and he bores a hole and he eats them. And that's what he says, what their Haudenosaunee law, according to what Rick Hill was talking about in that presentation, peace will always prevail over war. And it's even evident, he says, in where we get our wampum shells. So that was a great helpful. So that's where they would make these, they get these shells, and then the younger, can I show you this?
Yes, please. Council, you're invited to come up.
So you see those striations there? That means it's still growing. So the deeper purple is the more valuable part. But when you see, they'll say this is young wampum, the bee has that in it. So a younger bug will have a bit of white. So here, this deep purple is what you really want to go for, but you see how you can feel it's not that thick, not that you look at bee. But you see where this striation is, this is like tree rings showing the age. So when you see an individual bee and it has this white in there, then you can tell that it's a younger shell. But if it's this deep purple, then the shell is an older shell. So that's why it's more valuable.
Thank you.
In the replicas that you had then created, Mr. Corbiere, in response to your interpretation, I gather, of the speech that you had read into the record for us. And each of those, you said, firstly, the council fire at Sault Ste. Marie has no emblem, because then the council was held. So there's no depiction on the belt of that particular.
I think what they mean there is they left it blank because that's where it was held. But now this part that I'm going to talk about, and you see that map up there, I learned this from Professor Darlene Johnston. And she's the one who showed me this, that transcript. Those two transcripts, well, one is published in Peter Jones's book, and the other is in the Library and Archives of Canada. So she said, what this belt actually is about, she said that she suspected, and we put this together, that her logic bears out, is that actually what the Haudenosaunee were doing was affirming and acknowledging the principal proprietorship in those areas based on lands. So at Sault Ste. Marie, now this is why we would say that at Sault Ste. Marie, a crane would have been placed there, because the principal proprietorship and the principal clan and the principal chieftainship resided in the Chijok, the crane clan at Sault Ste. Marie. But as you noted, it said that there was no emblem put there, but there is a council fire there, but the no emblem is to indicate that that's where this council occurred. Then the next one.
Excuse me, is the word you used plant or plan? The plan is there, the plant is there.
Clan.
Clan, thank
I'm sorry, plan?
Yeah.
P-L-A-N.
you. Clan.
Clan.
Sorry.
I was wondering, I said, did I say clan? Okay, I'll take a drink. So, the next council fire that was ignited was on Manitoulin Island. And like I mentioned with Monkmamish, his Odem was a wasi, brown bowhead, a small catfish. And then he becomes the principal chief of the Odawa on Manitoulin at Wikwankong, from about 1840s till his death in the early 1850s. And then his son takes over briefly, and then his son dies. And then there's a bit of who should be the head chief, but then it's his grandson, William Kanoshne. Well, briefly, I should say, Thomas Kanoshne ends up being Tama, we call him, ends up becoming the principal or head chief. And then after that, it's William Kanoshne, the grandson, who was the chief there for a long time up until the turn of the century. But also you see where La Cloche is, and the La Cloche band was, like I had said yesterday, Sean Osway was the chief of the La Cloche band. And then they own the reserve now, as we call now, Weewaskinaga, some say Wawaskinaga, and Birch Island is commonly called now. But his land, like I said yesterday, on the original of the 1836 treaty, he drew his totem, and based on the dorsal fins, it looks like it would be a pike, but it also could be, based on those same dorsal fins, it could be a sturgeon. And but Thomas Somerville Anderson wrote in pencil beside the image of the fish that Sean Osway had drawn, and he put the word pike in pencil. So, but like I had mentioned, a descendant says that it wasn't pike, that it's actually sturgeon, the man. Regardless, the point being is that the second council fire that was ignited on Manitoulin, that was to burn eternity, was given to a fish tank. And then that white fish, in this case, the white fish is not the species, the white fish is denoting purity. Just like how it's a white deer, it's denoting purity. And then you see the next part there, where you go from French River, and there's like just scroll up there, and that's Wagimalke's Doden. So each of these Dodens that are drawn, I'll back up here. So the demarcations on that, I had my research assistant, Crystal Lemos, make this map for me. Each of those demarcations, those auburn lines, are actually the lines that the Vidal-Henderson map of 1849 used when they went on their commission to find out whose territory was whose. So this is based on the 1849 Vidal-Henderson map. And so that demarks the first quadrant there, demarks Iwakansa's territory, next one Patasways, and then the next one Snakes, and the next one Espanoles, and then the next one Shawnasways, and then Wagimalke, and then Ben-Gwenesham. So you see on there, then Wagimalke is Beaver Clan, and what I mentioned yesterday was the people, before they were called Beaver Clan people, before there was Ojibwe as a meta group, they were called the Mi'kmaq. And the Mi'kmaq people kind of disappeared from the record because they end up being called Ojibwe. Everyone ends up becoming called Ojibwe or Soto. And, but they were called, now the Mi'kmaq, the descendants of the Mi'kmaq or Beaver Clan, Anishinaabe people. Likewise, these Caribou, or Ben-Gwenesham is on the Magneton River there. That's where he would have been. And he, Venetia is Caribou Clan. I think it goes down. So in 1836, you see he signs that, I think, with no antlers. And Heidi will talk about this, Dr. Heidi Walker will probably talk about this more. But on the 1862 treaty that he signed at Manitowoc, he gives himself a full rack of antlers for whatever reason. Might have been time of year. But August is when this is signed, August 9th, and maybe their antlers aren't fully in. And then in October of 1862 is when they signed that. That's when they would have had a full rack of antlers. So maybe that's the explanation. Anyway, what I was more concerned with when I had Crystal Newell's make this map, and this is based on Darlene Johnson's work and presentation to the Eco-Wash Inquiry. And she had talked about connecting people to places via plans. And like I mentioned yesterday, how Professor Johnson was doing this for the Bruce Peninsula and Saugeen Peninsula, and Dr. Heidi Walker was doing this for the North Shore of Lake Ontario, and then I was doing this collecting all the totems from my tribal documents along the North Shore of Lake Huron and also the South Shore of Lake Huron and East Shore of Lake Michigan. So that was my intent, but to actually show this map and correlate it to this Wampa belt, we'd actually have to extend that to the Narrows, and then we would show, you would see that Chief Meskwaki and his son actually are Caribou Clan people. And then remember in the speech it said that our ancestors placed there a white deer, or the other one, a white reindeer, at the Narrows, and that they placed a dish with one spoon there, and that they then entrusted the top and the belt to the caribou who resides there at the Narrows.
And where is the Narrows, Mr. Corbiere?
The Narrows is on the north shore of Lake Simcoe, and it connects Lake Simcoe and Lake Couchiching in Ontario. And the present reserve that is there now is called Rama, but in our language we call it McJickening. And it's called McJickening because there are the fish weirs that are there. The fish weirs make fence, and that's our name. McJickening is a fence. So McJickening means the fence, and if any of you have gone to Casino Namba, you'll see they have their emblem has a deer jumping, and that's because of that they're showing. And then if you look at the Toronto Island Purchase and any of the treaties around Toronto, you'll see the prevalence of the Eagle Clan there. And then remember it says on this belt, the top of this belt, that our ancestors placed on a tall pine tree at the mouth of the Credit River an eagle. And again, that's the Eagle Clan. So, like I said, and this is what Darlene, I got this from Professor Darlene Johnson, that this belt actually represents that the Haudenosaunee are acknowledging and affirming.
Sorry, this belt?
Either one of these.
Can you put that on, please? Okay, thank you.
Yeah. The belt that's actually missing. The one that we have the top on, but these that we recreated. Yeah. So what the Haudenosaunee, our interpretation is that the Haudenosaunee are saying, we recognize and acknowledge that you of the fish clan are the principal chiefs and the principal proprietors at Anishinaabe. You of the Beaver clan are the principal chiefs and proprietors in and around Penetanguishene area. You of the Caribou clan are principal chief and proprietor around the Narrows. And you of the Eagle clan are principal chief and proprietor on the North Shore of Lake Ontario, principally around Toronto and Mississauga of New Craig. And remember that this belt is given after the Huron are dispersed from Huronia, from around the Midland, Penetanguishene, Lake Simcoe area. They're dispersed from there, and it's the Six Nations that disperse them. The Haudenosaunee are the ones that disperse them. So by that, they dispersed the Hurons from there. They then would have made a claim to owning that. But then after the Anishinaabe fought back, we then became the possessors of that. And that's what that belt represents in our area.
You became the possessors of.
That area that the Huron were removed from by the Haudenosaunee.
Your Honor, just with respect to the map that's depicted up on the screen that Mr. Corbiere has indicated had been prepared by his research assistant, we do not have that in the materials. And I will be seeking my friend's consent to file that, again as a demonstrative aid, to correspond to the story that he told in reference to the speech that he read into the record.
Will there be a collection of demonstrative aids with Alan Corbiere?
Yes, there will, Your Honor. And perhaps what we might do, if I can anticipate where I think you're going, is that we could collect those and then have those filed perhaps as a single exhibit.
That's my thought, because then they're labeled in that way, each of them, a collection of documents used by
Photographs.
Alan, right, used by Alan Corbiere and his evidence as demonstrative. And then 1, 2, 3, is it possible you could do that with your, you use them now, but I'm just thinking for the purpose of naming them as exhibits, a single exhibit.
Yes.
Suit counsel.
Hearing no
I
dissent.
see my friend nodding. Thank you.
So the first one we have is the two belts. The second one is the map showing the clan designations. We've started, I think they could become parts of, what was the last exhibit? Was it J?
Would you like to make it composite?
So let's, for the moment, presume that they will be part of J. And you can prepare a list of them afterwards, if that's it.
Yes, thank you very much, Your Honor.
Thank you.
In referring to the two belts, you had talked about there being some speeches given, or perhaps they were carriers. You mentioned the name John Smoke Johnson and John Buck. Yes?
Yeah.
Were they the holders of the belt? But you told us that this belt is nobody knows where it is.
We are currently looking for the original of this belt. We don't know where it is. We use its trail, but we haven't turned over every rock yet. And there's a famous photograph of Six Nations Longhouse people. And in that, there's a picture of John Smoke Johnson. And the Haudenosaunee men are seated on chairs, and on their laps are all these different wampum belts. And then standing in behind, one seated fellow is John Smoke Johnson, and he's pointing behind the fellow's shoulder to one of the belts. So he was, these guys were a deputation or delegation on behalf of the Six Nations that went up to actually renew this treaty. And they would say there was time to do that. They would urge each other to do that. And like I said, then after they came up and they were the ones who knew and were familiar with the treaties that they entered into. So Yellowhead Meskwaki was the keeper of the belt. The Haudenosaunee gave it to the Anishinaabe, and they were the ones that kept it. And then in one of the preliminary remarks, either John Buck or John Smoke Johnson says, I know that belt, meaning this one here, this belt that we made. And so then that's when they talked about it, because they kept up. The Haudenosaunee were, for wampum, they're the premier people that maintained and developed this tradition with wampum. And they're the ones who have the most belts that depict most of their treaties and also their history. And so they really actively maintain the knowledge of their wampum belts. And they constantly met in their longhouse and to discuss it, to talk about it, and to maintain that as a mnemonic device that aid the retention and the integrity of their oral tradition. So that's why they, without having the belt in front of them for the whole year, and then when they met, they were able to recite the speech because they worked on it, they knew it, they maintained it.
And when you say recite the speech, that is, you've also referred to the talk was preserved, is that right?
Yeah, the talk and the speech I'm using interchangeably, that would be the same. But they often talk about wampum as being the talk. And it's a Siganok actually that uses the phrase, the spirit of the body of my words. And then what I've heard some Haudenosaunee elders say is that whenever they believe, the Haudenosaunee believe, that whenever you talk over the wampum, it's actually taking its spirit is drawing in and taking in those words. That's what I've heard the Haudenosaunee say of their wampum and their wampum belts. That it's a device that will retain those words that are spoken over the belts and the wampum.
The longhouse process that you described, the Haudenosaunee maintaining, is that part of how the talk or the speeches are maintained?
I would imagine so, but I don't really know too much about the longhouse per se. I've heard a number of elders talk, the late Ernie Benedict, the late Jake Thomas, and then also this guy's still alive, Bruce Elijah, Faith Keeper who's in Ida, and Jake Thomas was a Cayuga, and Ernie Benedict was a Mohawk. But I wouldn't say that I know how they do this. I just know that particular speech that was recorded and written down, and then I noticed other writings as well of how they interacted with Anishinaabe when they would renew these treaties.
And Chief Meskwaki was the recipient of the belt from the Haudenosaunee. He would have had a tradition or a talk or a speech as well. And then what happened from there to that?
Actually, it's in one sense, the only reason I know about this is because of Peter Jones's book. Well, first I should say the only reason I know about it is because of Professor Darlene Johnson. Secondly, I should say then that after we were able to fill in where these clans are and then show how different treaties were signed throughout the years, that it showed these totems are in those particular places throughout time, that then we have this talk, and it's the talk and the belt that go together. But in the second case, the only reason that I know more about this is because of Peter Jones, the Reverend Peter Jones writing this down. Otherwise, it could have disappeared in a sense, and it may have reappeared elsewhere at a different time. But because he wrote it down and then he published it in his book, that's how. And then also there was another record of it. But I don't know. I don't know the elders in Anjikini in Rama. I don't know their elders, and so I can't say that they still maintain this. I don't know that just because I haven't gone there and I haven't heard them recite this or talk about this.
Do you know whether or not at Ninjigini they maintain their totem?
Yeah, yes, they maintain their totem. And like I said, when you go to Casino Rama, the logo of Casino Rama looks like a deer jumping out of a sun or a circle. But, yeah, so that's where they maintain that. That's their principal domain, but they have other domains there as well. But the principal chieftainship historically has resided with a big domain. One will have the Caribou clan maintain the chieftainship historically there.
There are a couple of other things that you mentioned, the dish or the one dish and spoon or dish and spoon. Do you refer to that as a treaty?
Yes. It's the dish with one spoon is a long-standing treaty. We don't know the date per se of when it was first given. And like I had said, in the late 1690s, a deputation had come up to Michilimackinac, and then another deputation had gone to Sault Ste. Marie. And in one deputation, they had 8 belts. And one of those 8 was a dish with one spoon. And then another famous, I shouldn't say famous, because it actually regrettably isn't that famous. It's starting to get covered in the curriculum, but it was a gathering, they call it the Great Peace of Montreal in 1701. And it's at that time in 1701 that Governor Callier tries to effect a peace throughout the Great Lakes. And he invites all the different nations to come out. And then at that time, he actually, this is disputed in the literature at this point, but he does say that his kettle, sometimes they call it a kettle instead of a dish, and sometimes they call it the bowl, common kettle, common dish. It's the same thing, that it had one spoon or ladle. But interestingly, Calgary says that he gave wampum what each of the chiefs that attended that conference, and so that we would maintain the top that was given here, is what Calgary says to all the leaders that are in attendance. So he gave them wampum, but what is disputed or what is not really known is if it is a dish with one spoon wampum belt. I have a replica of a dish belt here. Now I think to show it to Your Honor or the court, I could.
Perhaps I see the hour. This maybe is an appropriate time as any to take the lunch break.
Okay. Don't want to drive to the hotel, please. What's the best we can do for lunch? Think you can eat in an hour?
An hour will suit us.
Okay, why don't we do that? I have, it's 11:50. All right, so we'll come back at 12:50 to go until 2.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Moon, can you tell me where you think you are in your material with Mr. Corbiere?
We want to get through the part that he's in now, and we can certainly do that this afternoon. Then we have a major area that we intend to move into. There are some aids, some charts that we will be providing to our friends. I'm not sure if we quite have those prepared yet. sort fixed it.
Do you, all I'm saying is, do you think an hour will get, where do you think an hour will get you?
I think we can get to the end of the section that he is at now comfortably.
And what would be left after that?
I would say, and again, I'm going to estimate, I would say 3 hours max.
So a half day?
Yes,
Okay. That's it. I mean, the best we can do is estimate.
absolutely. Thank you,
Okay.
Your Honor.
And shall I ask you before lunch or after lunch, what council, what you have thought of for a proposed start time in Garden River? Yesterday, there was some suggestion, I thought from Mr. Honourable, that we could start on a Tuesday, but at the end of the day, I thought there was residing from that.
Yeah, well, we've discussed it, and I think we've arrived at 1 p.m.
1 p.m.
Great time.
Which day?
On Monday.
Oh, okay. So Monday becomes a travel day.
On Monday, sorry, Monday morning becomes a travel day. We start Monday afternoon.
Right.
With the idea of trying to make sure we don't jam the witnesses on Tuesday, Wednesday. That was the thought.
Good. All right, so partly obviously I need to finalize that. I need to communicate with Sault Ste. Marie with respect to staff and somebody I hope from the plaintiff side perhaps is communicating. I'll get the court services to be communicating with Garden River, who's providing the venue.
Now,
Right.
Ms. Corbiere has reminded me that we had discussed getting together in a similar pre-consultation there before. We may need to do that about the kind of logistics layout, and also there's one elder we haven't met, Irene Stevens. We should probably take some time with her in a
Is
pre-consultation.
Fred Kelly on that list as well?
Fred Kelly's on that list as well.
So we haven't met him.
Yeah.
So should we meet at, so we have that meeting at 1 and start at 2, or should we meet at 12 and start at 2?
We could aim for something like lunch with council.
Lunch with the elders?
Yeah,
That might be a nice way to meet them.
yeah, that might work. Let's see if we can arrange that. So we
On site?
on site.
Okay, why don't we try and do that? For what time?
Noon.
I'm not sure how that works with plane schedules, but what folks work. Do you know if that works?
It works for me.
So you're
I
12.
think
It works for us too.
Okay, so 12 o'clock, council and elders for lunch, planned 1 o'clock start. Okay,
Okay, Your Honor.
all right, can we still come back here at 10 to 12, 20, 10 to 1, can we still come back? All right,
Yes.
thank you very much.
All right.
understand that you will file a more complete Exhibit J on Monday.
Yes, color photographs are being prepared of the items that Mr. Corbiere will be referring to. Mr. Corbiere, I see that you have taken out the wampums that you had showed us earlier.
Correct.
And there is, that is an additional belt you have before you? Oh, 2 additional belts.
This one you see on the screen is the bottom one, and this is the one that we were talking about, the dish with 1 spoon. And if you see,
You may stand if you're more comfortable in displaying those.
so you see this dish here, and then what I was talking about, why we placed inside this hexagon that same symbol. Because this is the dish that was placed at the Narrows, and the dish that was placed at the mouth of the River Credit. And it's based on this image, the dish with 1 spoon, which is a wampum belt that stands on its own and preceded this belt. So,
Can I just ask you, Mr. Corbiere, it'll be tough to remember, but when you say things like it replaced this belt, one of the things that we're producing, as in every trial, is a transcript. So if you've given that transcript a name, when you say it, the image is repeated in this belt, would you name it? So that
oh,
it's
okay, I see. All right. Okay, I understand.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Mr. Corbiere, the belts that you have shown and the other items that you've shown, the quail shell, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right.
That's correct.
It is now depicted in an image at the top. That is the shell that you've shown us this morning.
Yes, that is this one that I'm holding.
And then the belt immediately below that is the belt that you described for us this morning as well.
That's correct. That is the belt called, that I was saying we didn't want to call Yellowhead belt. But it's the belt that the Haudenosaunee had given the Anishinaabe with the council fires depicted on. And it was this one, that's the one that's made by Ken Miracle. And the next one is the same belt, the rendition, but made by Brian Charles. And that is the one, it isn't on the screen, but it's this one.
Right, the one that you showed us this morning with the 5 hexagons, I think you've described.
Yeah.
And up on the screen, there's another belt. Perhaps I would just let you describe that. It is in the middle of the photographic depiction.
That belt I had seen, and I had seen this printed in a publication called Wampum Belts of the Iroquois. And that was a publication put out by the North American Indian Traveling College, which is housed in Eggleston. And then they had a project where they were reclaiming their wampum belts and their agreements, and they were making belts, teaching their young people how to make those belts. And in that book, this image of this belt is called Ojibwe Friendship Belt in that particular publication. But when we refer back to Peter Jones's book and his history of the Ojibwe people, he actually refers to a time when Joseph Brant met with the Anishinaabe, and he had given them a belt as well. And in the discourse, they talk about it being a friendship belt. And so Peter Jones didn't write or draw an image of that belt. But what I use this for is to demonstrate what are motifs or metaphors in the discourse. So, what this belt demonstrates,
When you say this belt,
I'm just going to picked this one up. It's called the Ojibwe Friendship Club. And this Ojibwe Friendship Club, you see in contrast to the one with the 5 council fires, it has just one row of white beads to depict the road. So in a sense, it shows that the peace isn't as widespread, or perhaps it's more tenuous. And the analogy that I make when I'm doing presentations is that this is Highway 6, let's say, and then here you got this belt, and it's 3 beads wide, white beads wide. The piece is more secure, and that's like being on the 401 or the 400. That there's more leeway to travel, and the piece is more secure.
So for the record, Mr. Corbiere, when we look at the photograph that's up on the screen now, the single line through the 5 council fires, as you described it, that is the top belt, and that is the one that you indicated that the line references peace, or it stands for, or is a metaphor for.
Correct.
And when you look at the then second belt, it's in the middle of the photograph, and has 3 lines running through it, and you interpret that as
that's also a road of peace, but the road is wider. And sometimes you hear that in a council proceeding, when you read it, they'll say, I make the road smooth and I make it wide. So that's one of the metaphors that they use of speech, of peace when they're meeting in council. So the other thing, maybe I shouldn't talk about that. This one here, this Ojibwe Friendship Belt, the other thing that I use it for is that it has 2 terminal ends, as opposed to this belt, it doesn't end.
And when you say this belt, you're referring to
the 5 council belt, the road of peace continues on before the belt, and it continues on right till the end. That if you put them together, like so, then you've made a circle by connecting that road together. So that circle, making a circle with this road and this belt, and indicates, of course, eternity. That this is going to be forever. That when you have these 2 together, the road continues on and on. But this one, which is the Ojibwe Friendship Belt with the 2 rectangles at either end, it refers to a finite space. So it's not going to continue on in a temporal sense. This is more about a spatial. That's how I would talk about this. So here on this belt, the Ojibwe Friendship Belt, it has a rectangle at one extremity, and then another rectangle at the other extremity. And oftentimes in these speeches, you'll read in various speeches, council proceedings throughout the era, wherever there's a written record, you'll often hear them talking about a map. And this could be a representation of the map. But I'll leave that for further discussion when we get talking later. But those are some of the ways the information is encoded on these belts, in a sense of what I want to clarify with this Ojibwe Friendship Belt. I'm not saying that it's a finite time. I'm saying it's a finite space. So, and when I'm saying this one too, this is a temporal and a spatial representation, because these council fires are in real space on the land. But by the fact that this road goes to the end and continues on, it refers to eternity. So this belt also could refer to eternity, but this belt is actually saying from where we live, our country, our map, and this is the Ojibwe Friendship Belt, all the way through to the extent of your country, there is a wide road of peace. And it expands, why it's so long, is this is the expanse of that. Whereas if it were just a short belt, and there are belts like this, it would indicate that the territory isn't as vast. It's a closer distance. There are shorter belts like this with these two images on there as well. So, I also want to preface my remarks here by, yesterday I had referred to that I only try to do work with belts that I know that have a definite, in my mind, a definite association with Anishinaabe. That's what any of these belts that I talk about have a definite association with Anishinaabe. Sometimes you'll hear people bring up this two-row wampum, and I haven't personally, in any of my research or any of my discussions, have heard of an Anishinaabe or read of Anishinaabe people using that as a metaphor. Only recently that people have started using that. That's how I've seen it, but I could be proven wrong on that. So that's why I don't talk about that two-row wampum. And when I get invited to, let's say, Ontario Ministry of Education or to the Ontario Ministry of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation, they ask me to talk about two-row wampum. And I tell them I don't talk about that. It's you should ask a Haudenosaunee person, is what I tell them. If you want to learn about that, you can talk to a Haudenosaunee person about that. But these belts that I'm showing and that are on the screen, the Ojibwe Haudenosaunee Friendship Belt, the Dish with One Spoon, the 5 Council Fire Belt, these are belts that have no European involvement, no settler involvement in these belts. And these are treaties amongst ourselves. So we get into a bit of semantics, because of course some people don't like the word tribe. So we used to say these are intertribal documents, but some people don't like that word tribe, because it has a bit of a derogatory connotation in some contexts. So I call them international, because we're nations. But then others would dispute that as well. But anyway, that's how I refer to them. Because we always talk, now we're talking to the Canadian government about nation-to-nation relationship. But before that, we actually did have nation-to-nation relationship with the Haudenosaunee. So our nation-to-nation relationship was with the Haudenosaunee and also with the Sioux and other nations. And this is how we memorialize that with these wampum belts. So this dish with one spoon, instead of it being just a dish, it could be solid purple. And then in that case, you might think the dish is empty because we're solid. And actually, as Peter Jones recorded in his record at that council, where the Haudenosaunee came to meet with the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe, and the Mississaugas, and he said, in the middle of that dish are white wampum beads. And he said, those white wampum beads represent beaver tail. And they said that the Haudenosaunee had said, we know you Ojibwe people love beaver tail, and you treat it as a delicacy. That's why we put that in there for you to eat. So we're currently learning more about the dish with one spoon as we have continued discussions with the Haudenosaunee people, and then we also have people doing continued research on this as well. But this dish with one spoon, now if you go to Toronto and you go to University of Toronto for a public talk, or you go to York University for a public talk, now what people are saying is that they are on dish with one spoon territory. That's part of their introduction before they talk. That I want to acknowledge that they'll say something to the effect that I want to acknowledge the fact that I am on dish with one spoon territory, and I want to acknowledge the Haudenosaunee people and the Anishinaabe people and the Mississaugas of New Credit, and that I'm on their territory, been welcome to their territory. So that's what and that's just been within the last year that people started saying that. So now, when some people are talking about this dish as that it means the dish is actually the land. The land is the dish. And so what they say is that this treaty means the Haudenosaunee or the Anishinaabe can come and hunt for food. That's what that means. Nobody can be stopped from feeding their families. But what it doesn't say, what it doesn't allow, is somebody to come up and take a whole bunch of beaver and trade those furs in somebody else's territory. That seems to be something that we got to sort out now. So in the past, what I've called this dish with one spoon, I've jokingly said, is that this, and it's not really a joke, it's actually, I think it's actually true, is that I call it an intertribal treaty harvesting accord. And that's what the lingo that government and the provincial territorial organizations use. An intertribal harvesting treaty accord. But to me, that's just fancy words for dish with one spoon. So, what these beaver, what I suspect is that why the beaver tail is in there, it's an acknowledgement that we have the primary right. The Anishinaabe have the primary right to hunt in southern Ontario. And that the Haudenosaunee, by giving this belt, and this is all prior to the American Revolution, bear that in mind. So that's what this belt represents. That it's the dish is the land, and that everyone has the right to come and hunt, to eat for their family. But it's not to come and clean out the beaver or the otter or any of the furs, and then to take off and go and trade for whatever. So, I'm going to go back again to saying why this specific treaty is Anishinaabe, and also further that Manitoulin Island is part and parcel of this, specifically. In 1845, the chiefs of Manitoulin, specifically at Wakumacom, the letter was signed off at Wakumacom, but it included other chiefs. But it was written in Ojibwe, and a linguist by the name of David Pentman had found this letter written in Ojibwe, and it was directed to the chiefs at Conestoga. It was written in Ojibwe, and in Ojibwe they talked about that. They basically said, the chiefs of Manitoulin in that letter basically said, we believe we've heard that you are going to come to the island and that you possibly might settle here. Basically that was the news going around. And then they said in that letter, if you do come, bidon away, godon naganana, get your $10. And what that means in English, bring our dish that is highly valued. And then when you say bidon, you're commanding somebody, bidon, bring it. And then godon naganana, they didn't just say bidon godon nagan. They didn't say bring your dish. They said godon naganana, bring our dish. And it is indeed, in this case we get to this linguistic concept, we as an inclusive remark or we as an exclusive remark. And in Ojibwe, we mark that with a personal prefix in the independent order of verbs. So that nouns. So when we say godon naganana, we're saying our dish, but I'm including, if I'm talking to you, Don, I say godon naganana, bidon godon naganana, bring our dish. But if I'm talking to our honor here, and I say to her about me and Don's dish, ndon naganana, I'll bring our dish, but it's not yours. You're not included. So it's like saying, we Anishinaabe, and so I'm not including you in the we. But if I say we humans, then we're all included. So in Ojibwe, it's marked if the person being spoken to is included in the we. But in English, that isn't explicitly marked, only contextually. You know, I could sit here and say, yeah, we went there last night, and then the rest of you really wouldn't know who we is referred to. But in Ojibwe, if I'm talking to you, and then I say, Dona, Ngija men, then whoever's being spoken to knows that he or she ain't included in the we. But if I say, Kija men, we all went, then they know that they're included in that. Same thing with this dish. Ndon naganana, with an N in front, means our dish, but not yours. Godon naganana means our dish, including who is being addressed. So when the chiefs wrote that in Ojibwe, Godon naganana, they're writing to the chiefs in Kanesatali to say, it is you and our dish together. Bring that here when you come to Manitoulin. And get your $10 book. It is highly valued. That which is highly valued. That's what that word means. Get your $10 book. Bring our dish that is highly valued. So Dr. Pendleton, the linguist, did not know what that reference was. Godon naganana. He says it means our dish. He knew it meant our dish, but he says the people over there at Oka and Kanesatali had adopted Christianity by this time. And he says, and the people of Wakumakam also had marginally adopted Christianity as well. And he says, so they must be actually asking them to bring some kind of silver plate that carries the Eucharist, that you put the Eucharist on. So they thought it was something to do with the Roman Catholic Mass. That's what Pendleton had first postulated. And then a scholar by the name of Victor Littman said, no, this is actually a reference to the dish with one spoon. Subsequent research that I did, reading the Wakumakam Diary, Holy Cross Mission Diary, they do report that a delegation or deputation from Kanesatali will be coming to Manitoulin Island. They finally show up in 1849. And in one sense, it set off a bit of alarm, because this is going to sound kind of funny, but the Mohawks are coming. That's what it was. The Mohawks are coming. And that still got people's attention. And they would have been thinking, are you going to come to fight? and there was still this lingering bad feelings. But they also knew we made peace. And then what the priests had written, and it's unfortunate that the priests did not describe each and every belt, but they said that this deputation showed up, and when they showed up, they had a number of wampum belts that they presented to the chiefs there at that time. And so they brought each belt out, and then unfortunately, the Jesuits did not brought out the dish with one spoon, brought out 5 counts of fire belt, brought out the friendship belt. They didn't write that, unfortunately. But there is a record that says a deputation or delegation of Haudenosaunee came to Manitoulin Island, specifically Wequampong, and they had brought wampum belts. And then 4 or 5 years earlier, the chiefs had written that letter asking that they bring that to renew the dish with one spoon. Now, switch ahead again to 1862, and then also 1865, and then we got the speech of Chief Wakadijik of Wequampong. And they're talking again about the Treaty of Manitoulin, the contested Treaty of Manitoulin, 1862. And then in his speech, Chief Wakadijik says, we don't want to break our dish, as it were. Meaning we don't want Manitoulin as a dish to be broken up. Meaning our land again, our territory, to be broken up. We want to keep our dish whole. That's what he said at that time. And this was a council between those that had signed the treaty and the Wikwemekong people, Wequampong, who did not sign and who did not want to sign that treaty or did not accept it. So this was a council between the two. So that's, again, further why I'm talking about this dish with one spoon, that it has specific reference and specific ties to the Manitoulin Anishinaabe. That the Godot Naminanam, the letter that was written and went to Constantine and then came back, and then when the deputation showed up, and they brought belts, and then also further, Chief Wakadijik uses that specific phrase in a council that is in amongst the chiefs of Manitoulin, that we don't want to break our dish, as it were, is what he said, how it was translated into English. So, Godot Naminanam means our dish, and then these white beads in that dish refer to the beaver tails. And my thinking, of course, I could be challenged on this by Haudenosaunee people, but the fact that they placed beaver tail in the dish and gave it to us, they're serving that to us, and they're saying there's something being said there with that beaver tail in there. They're not giving us an empty plate. That's what or an empty bowl or an empty dish. So that's why I talk about this dish with one spoon, because we have various contexts, various times. We have talked, we have written, and we have oral tradition references to the dish with one spoon, and in our language as well, which I always I'm glad that the chiefs at the time to write in Ojibwe in the mid-19th century, as in it's in our language, it's in our medium, and it's their understanding, and it's expressed how they would have expressed it as well. So that's our dish with one spoon, and it was extended and given at different times. One was out by the Troy River, or Lake St. Clair. They said they also had extended a moon of wampum there, the Haudenosaunee had, And then also up at Sault Ste. Marie, he said they took some belts up there. And then of course, with this 5 council fire belt, the Baltic, Middle Missing, the Restoule pushing, Minuang Jickening, Minuang Zinege Ziggy. At those 5 council fires, then the last two of those places had a fish placed there by the ancestors. So, I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to say about that.
Okay, well,
Mr. Worm, I have one question. Mr. Corbiere, when you say the dish with 1 spoon was extended and given at different times, was the belt given physically out of their hands to someone else, or were there a number of different belts with belts that had dish with 1 spoon, or would they bring it and recite and take it home?
The Kanesatake one sounds like they had, because they asked them to bring it. But then it looks like there's one, there should, in my understanding, with the 5 council fire, there should have been a belt also that accompanied this one with the keeper of the top, meaning whoever was the chief of the Caribou clan at the Narrows. So there should have been, that's how I would understand it. But I don't, as far as I know, that it doesn't say that there's a dish there, the dish belt. And again, of course, like what I said, this belt has actually been missing for a number of years. So we don't know if these 2 were there. In all likelihood, yes, there was a belt there. And then also down by Anistali with the people there at Oka, Anistali, that came up.
But my question is, was there always only 1 belt for each?
No.
It could have been made in multiple?
Yeah, yes. So the other thing that I didn't bring up yet was when in 1701, they had the great peace at Montreal. And in this peace, they had, I don't know how many different nations there, I forget off the top of my head. But all around the Great Lakes, different nations went to have a grand council at Montreal. And then they also invited Haudenosaunee people. And at that point, this was when things had been, the war between the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee was was waning. The principal fighting had been done probably within the prior decade. But it is now waning. But the Haudenosaunee had allied themselves with the British. So one of the remarks about this great peace at Montreal in 1701 is that simultaneously a deputation or delegation is meeting the British at Albany. So they're kind of, the Haudenosaunee are meeting both colonial entities, whereas the rest of the Great Lakes nations are just meeting with the French, and they have this great peace. And then when Governor Cartier, he makes reference to the common pot, they call it, or the common kettle, and then that's the same thing, the common pot, common kettle, or the dish. So he makes reference to that in his speeches. But then as everyone is leaving, what he says is that he has given a belt to each representative of each nation. But what he doesn't say in there, and this is what is open to speculation and debate, is whether that was a dish with 1 spoon belt given to each nation that was there. So the Illinois people were there, the Sauk and Fox were there, the Potawatomi were there, the Menominee were there, and the Ho-Chunk, which are commonly called Winnebago people, were there, and the Miami, and of course the Odawa, and the Soto, and the Mississauga, and the Miquot. So conceivably, there would be over 20 or 30 of these belts that had been given. but what we don't know is what the image was on that belt. So some scholars say it was a dish belt, because that's what we kept talking about, and he wanted the fur trade, basically he wants the fur trade to work, but the fighting between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe and other nations is what's slowing down the fur trade. So he wants the dish with one spoon to prevail so that everyone can hunt over the territory, and he wants peace to be restored such that the fur trade can flourish. And so he gives a belt, but like I said, just to be clear, some scholars have postulated that it was a dish belt, because he talks about that, and he says in his rendition, he actually says that I give you a dish with a spoon and a knife. Now the Haudenosaunee version of their treaty is that they say we give this dish with one spoon, and we say that there shall be no knife or sharp objects around it, for fear of bloodshed or some accident causing bloodshed. And if blood is shed, then there are consequences. So the Haudenosaunee oral account is that there is no sharp objects to be placed around this dish with one spoon. But in Governor Callier's notes of the council proceedings, he says that he gives a dish and a spoon and a knife to cut your victuals. You didn't say that. So I've thought about that, been thinking about that. Why does he give them a knife? And in my thinking, this is speculation. It's not guessing though, but I suspect that he's giving the knife because, like I said, he wants this fur trade to go. And part of the colonial officials, when they acted in the role of father, they gave the children implements, iron implements specifically, to ease their way of life. So they gave iron axes and hatchets, butcher knives, snares, guns, ball, shot. So when they're giving these things, and oftentimes in these councils you'll see that the chiefs actually request, they say, I want my young men are using bows and arrows, but the string has been worn. He wants a new bow, but really, and then the council secretary then puts in brackets, he means a gun. So that's what they speak like that. So in this case, what I think Governor Callier is doing is he's saying, as your father here in Montreal, I give you this belt, but I also give you the means to go out on the trap line and to cut and to process the hides. That's what I think it is. And then when the Haudenosaunee make peace with us, they say, no sharp objects shall be near them, for fear that the blood is shed. And in the bloodshed, consequences will occur. Action will have to be taken, and there will be consequences that we may not want.
Thank you for that, Mr. Corbiere. If we can, pardon me, turn back to the picture that is depicted up there, which we will be asking to be made an exhibit as part of the demonstrative aids that Mr. Corbiere refers to. There is an additional item at the bottom which you have not spoke to. Could you tell us about that?
Those are these strings of wampum. And the pictures up there of all three belts, the Five Council Fire Belt, the Ojibwe Friendship Belt, and the Dish with One Spoon Belt, those are all replicas of what beads manufactured in Czechoslovakia. And that's why they're all such a nice solid color. But this belt that I had Brian Charles make.
That is
The 5 pounds of fire, but with the hexagons, using the hexagons. If you look at the belt, it actually looks like real wampum. And these beads are actually made of ceramic. And he gets them from somebody who makes them in the States. So a different medium, instead of plastic, it's ceramic. And they're actually made to look more realistic of what real wampum is like. So when I first started going around teaching about this, I just had these fake wampum. And I wanted to show people what real wampum was. And so I got these strings of real white wampum and real purple wampum. And that's what's at the very bottom, are these wampum strings. So you'll see that these, in various councils, these will be deployed or used in a number of different ways. And then 1829, Chief Odawa, Chief of Signal, Jean-Baptiste Signal, is requested to speak on behalf of the Odawa. And they are informed, not just the Odawa, but all the nations that are assembled at St. Joseph's Island to receive their presents as per the Treaty of Niagara. They're receiving their presents, but the commanding officer there informs them that the council fire will be moved and that next year they will have to order penitentiary. So what the Signal says is, I give you this string, I give you this string of wampum, and with it I make a road to Penetangushin, to your new fire, and I will follow you there and see you there tomorrow, meaning next spring. Other times you'll see in different accounts, this is called a condolence ceremony, and then they talk about when they open up their ceremony, their council, especially the Haudenosaunee people, then they talk about wiping the tears, wiping the dust from their eyes, and the dirt from they don't say wipes from their ears, but they clean their ears too. And then sometimes they'll say stuff like, and I use this wampum string to dry your tears. You have, since the last time we met in council, perhaps you have lost some loved one. And I present this and dry your tears of mourning so that you are now here and present at this council, that you will be able to not be thinking of the loved ones you lost. And then likewise they say that with sometimes, usually they'll use a feather, or they'll talk about a real soft white doeskin to wipe the tears and to clean the ears. But other times they'll say, I use this wampum string to clean your ears and to set your heart aright. And so when they talk about these wampum strings, that's what they're presenting, these wampum strings, part of that condolence ceremony, to dry people's tears from the losses they have happened through, since the last time they had met, and then also to clean their ears so that they'll hear the message that is being said, and then also that they set their heart aright. And then they'll even find that they met in war, they'll say, I take this blood and I remove the hatchet from your head. So, of course, this is a metaphor. He's not literally show up at the meeting with a hatchet in his head stuff. And he says, and I removed the hatchet from your head that I was obliged to strike you with. So William Johnson said that, and others have said that in different opening council proceedings. And then they then say, and I take a healing salve and I wipe it to your wounds. And then they say, I'll take this this wampum. Sometimes it's a string, but more often I take this belt and I wrap up all the bones of your deceased and I inter them into a grave. And then the next belt they give me, they then say, and I flatten those graves so that no bones are sticking out of the earth, and that they may then distress you. So they're trying to, that's called a condolence ceremony that they talk about, they do. and oftentimes that's when these strings are used by the Haudenosaunee, but the Anishinaabe use these strings as well as pledges. That I will see, most often, you'll see them say, I'll give you this one, I'm going to follow this wampum to Penetration. And then they also said that when the garrison or the council fire was moved from Michilimackinac after James Treaty and moved to St. Joseph's Island, they said the same thing. I present this wampum string and I'll follow this to your new council fire, and then at St. Joseph's Island or at Drummond Island or at Penetration. So that's what they would do with these strings of wampum. They were like promises.
And we'll certainly see more of that and further descriptions of that. So your description of that now is quite helpful when we come to your review of in the next section of certain of those speeches. I appreciate your being able to clarify that, and we will be asking, as I said earlier, for that to be part of the exhibit in these proceedings. The international treaties that you described, the one between the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee, where this conversation began earlier today, it was obviously meant to be solemn in the exchange of belts, or was there a two-way exchange of belts, or was there a delivery of the belts one way? And secondly, were there other ceremonies that your research, that through your research you might have discovered and can tell us about?
Well, with these ones, they mentioned that they ignited the council fire. They would always talk about that. And then the second thing that they would mention is then that they all smoked the caliban or a pipe of peace. And then once that was done, then they did this condolence ceremony. And then once they had done that, like this yellowhead belt, it doesn't look like it was made in duplicate. The 5 council fire belt doesn't sound like it was made in duplicate. And part of the reason for that sounds like to me is that in that sense, it compelled the people to come face to face to renew it. If they had 2 copies, they may not necessarily come to renew them, if you know what I mean. They maintain the contact, but if there's just one, then they physically have to go to that person's territory or home to visit this, and then to talk about it with each other, and then to renew it. And that's part of the purpose as well of treaty making, is face-to-face interaction. And instead of staying home and saying, well, that's over and done and settled, and we don't have to do anything more about it. So an active engagement and an active renewal process is what I think is why there's only one belt, is that they have to come and they have to work at it together. Because if you had 2 copies, then they could stay home and maintain their records that way. Or if they just had one, then they know they have to go and renew this. And renewal then meant face to face. That's how I think of it. But I'd like to someday, well, when I do visit some of the Haudenosaunee people I meet, there's too much to talk about that we never really get to ask each other all the questions in the brief time that we have together to talk about, to answer some of these kinds of things. So that's how I've thought of it, is that sometimes they do have, like with the dish with 1 spoon, there were multiple, but it was because it went to different nations. And then other times there would be just 1 copy, because it meant that those nations then have to go to each other. The other thing that we have to bear in mind, and I want to thank that one firekeeper there, who he was talking about, he took his daughter to the river, And he told me this morning, him and his daughter had picked 3 shells out of the river. And he says, that they were a bit of purple on them. And he says, imagine, to his little girl, he says, imagine then we had to make a bead out of this. And that we made one, me and you. And we got 3 of these plants. So we got 3 beads. And he says, now, look at this. How many plants are we going to need, he says to her, to make this?
And when you say look at this, you are holding...
It could be any belt. How many beads, individual beads, are on this belt? How many beads, how many shells have to be picked? And if I may, how many enemies have to be submerged in the water to get out these quail shells, and then to open them up, and then to drill them. So, in our mechanized society today, like my friend, he just orders these beads from Czechoslovakia, and he waits at home when somebody shows up at the door and says, you got a package here. And then he gets sent out, and he makes a loom, and he buys some sinew, and he starts working away. And it seems like a piece of cake. But back then, these guys had to go, they're Haudenosaunee people, and these are saltwater organisms. These aren't fresh water. So these guys can't go down to the river. They can't go to Lake Ontario. They're going either to St. Lawrence or down to the eastern seaboard to get this. And then they pick enough of them, and then they process enough of them, and they drill them. And then the amount of labor just to make one belt back then makes it sound like, of course now it sounds like a piece of cake, but back then that's part of why I think this was so valuable and so valued that they recognize the amount of work that went into it. And it's, like I was saying earlier, that they drilled the bead from either end, and it was because they were breaking beads when they tried to drill the hole straight through. And imagine if you pick, let's say just on average, out of 20 beads that you got, you're going to make 20 beads, let's say, hopefully, and of those 20, at least 3 or 4 break. So it would be a very laborious and time-intensive endeavor. So that's why it was so valued. And that's why I think as well that prior to the mechanization of it, that these belts there was just one. Whereas after they mechanized it, then there's all kinds of belts going around after a while, and belts are being swapped here and there. But earlier on, when they were making them, that was a factor into I believe, into whether there was 2 or whether there was 1. So.
Thank you, Mr. Corbiere. You have told us earlier that the Anishinaabe had I'm going to try to paraphrase you, had a regard for the spiritual realm. And I noticed that when you were mentioning that if there was only one, that they would have to go and visit it, as though it were perhaps an animate or a person. Was there any sort of that element to it, if I'm not being too inarticulate?
Some say that the nature of our language, we speak of things as either as alive or dead, but the linguistic term is animate or inanimate. So some people say that linguists say that that's really it's an arbitrary division of that. So, for example, in our language, I would say "Biskan Wikpan," and literally what you're saying is, "I am wearing it, a hat." But then, if I'm wearing a necklace, skoa, not koala. I'm wearing him a necklace or scarf. Or the other is mitts. Our word for mitts, majikkawan and majikkawanak. Majikkawan. I'm wearing him a mitt. That's literally what you would be saying. But we don't, when the speakers speak, they're not really thinking of it that way. And the analogy is the French language, where everything is either masculine or feminine. That's the analogy. That they say, well, we don't really, a speaker doesn't consciously think and refer to things as feminine or masculine. It's just that's how they learn to speak, and they know the division between those two categories, and that it impacts the choice of verb, and that the verb, the noun, the verb have to coincide and agree in gender, what they call it. And that means either masculine or feminine, or in the case of Anishinaabe, the noun and verb have to agree in Hennessy or in Annuities. So, I've been asked this before. When we refer to this, we call this migas. And I would say, moi ma migas. I see him, the migas. So when it's a bead, or when it's this quail shell, or this cowrie shell. This cowrie shell and this quail shell is the same word, migas, in our language. But if I had a freshwater clam, if we went out and we dove in the lake and grabbed a freshwater clam, which looks like this, but it's dark, in our language we call that S. S or essence or esses, a small clam. S is just a regular sized clam. Essence is a little clam. And so, this one though is migas. Quail, cowrie is migas, as is the inside as well is migas. So we call these migas, and when we make these beads, meat stuck. That's the plural form. And then some have said, like how we make a word for beads, now we have the regular beads. Nido menes. Nido is of course the spirit, and min refers that it's globular or seed-like. So nido menes means little spirit seeds. So some people call this meats and menes, the beads of Wambo. But usually it's just migas and beads. But when we turn around and make it into what in English is called a belt, it then changes into inanimate form. So I look at this, or this, and I say, Nuab ma migas. Nuab ma migas. Then I change and I look at this, and I say, the dish with 1 spoon belt, and I say, Nuab dan migas pakkan. And that's our word for this. And then pikkan pakkan, that means a harness or a tongue line. Migas pakkan. And then on the island here, that word means a harness for horses now. Whereas before in the old days, that was a word for a tongue line that So this is what we would do before. And that's what this is called. Migas pakkan. And so it ends up becoming inanimate. According to the dictionaries that I consulted, it would say migas, and it would say plural, migsa, and then it would say migas pikkan or migas pakkan, it would say migas pakkanan. And when they put plural, that's how you tell if they're animate or inanimate in our language. So before, when I first started looking up this word, because the English calls it belt, our word in our language is kachipizawin for a belt. So people would say, "Mees kachipizawin," but that literally means it girds you, it goes around you. But these, it's the other word I thought was "mi sabiga," and then when you say "abi," that refers to strings. And the reason I thought it was "mi sabiga" was because in the dictionaries they have the French would write differently than the English, like I had mentioned before with the orthographies. And then in Reverend Wilson's dictionary, it looks like he made that a long A sound, meaning ah. And then also the French dictionary, why they don't, some people don't like the Barada dictionary, is because he actually doesn't mark the vowel length over the, and so you have to know more to use that dictionary. Anyway, so before I used to think it was "mi-sabi," which still makes sense, because it means wampum strung together. And but here, with the Migas Pikpan, I found that word in the Ojibwe texts that were collected by William Jones. And it was in a story that and then he translated, he says, "Migas Pikpan," and then in brackets he put the tongue line studied with wampum. And then it dawned on me that when you call it the tongue line, it's like this, or like this. And then why I like that word is because the burden, or they call it the burden strap. The burden then is the top on the belt. The burden of the wampum keeper are the words in the belt. So that's what you're carrying. And that's why that word makes more sense now to me, that it's called Migas Pakka, that it's a tongue line of wampum, and that the burden that's being carried is the message.
Thank you very much, Mr. Corbiere. I think I understand a lot more than I did before, and I hope others who have listened to this have similarly shared in that. It is 2 o'clock now, Your Honor, and so I think this is a perfect place for us to end. Mr. Corbiere, we will see you tomorrow.
Better all understand that.
Your Honor, during the break, I had a chance to talk with Chief Surratt, our host at Garden River, and Chairman Mike Restoule. And so they just wanted me to give an update on the Robinson Huron. We'd like to, the Huron plaintiffs are going to make sure that on Monday at noon that they're going to share some food with everybody. So it'll be soup and sandwich, so you don't have to eat anything before. Soup, sandwich, and salad. They also wanted me the chief himself said he really enjoyed the ceremony we all had together in the sweat, starting in Thunder Bay. So I'm bringing this up now, so if any of you want to come to the sweat, that you bring it in your bags, the clothing that's required to be worn in the sweat, but you're all invited. And then there is the feast on Wednesday evening at 5:30. They're also going to put together, because they realize you don't hang out at the Garden River every day, where to eat for lunch. So I'll be emailing everybody some of that information. Thank you, Your Honor.
And what is the sweat associated with the feast or with the lunch?
The sweat is on Wednesday evening, and I'll give you more details on locations. And the feast is on Thursday.
Oh,
Well, that is a perfect segue to an expression of hospitality from Garden River, a perfect segue to my message of gratitude to the Huron plaintiffs who have welcomed us so warmly from the first minute we crossed the bridge this week. We have been really, I know I speak in the words of all the council, and certainly for the staff, we have been warmly welcomed at this hotel, which I have been told and I understand is owned by the nations on Manitoulin Island. Our feast was wonderful. The firekeepers have been very welcoming to us, and the elders who have conducted the smudge have, and generally given us teachings throughout the week, have been so generous with their time. And all of us, I echo the words of Council for Canada and Council for Ontario yesterday. All of us are very grateful for that show of hospitality in which. So shall I say then, we'll break now. Safe travels for everyone. I understand we'll move into a closing ceremony now before we get on the road. And for Mr. Corbiere, I don't know your exact date of coming back, but I'm sure your council do, but we'll see you next in Sudbury.
November 7th.
November 7th, thank you. All right, so we'll close court.
All rise. Oyez, oyez, oyez. The sittings of this court have now concluded. Long live the Queen.